Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first workshop of the COVID Recovery and Resiliency webinar series. I am Andrea Allen, Executive Director of the Delta Center for Economic Development at Arkansas State University. We have a very exciting list of presenters today, and I'm going to serve as the virtual MC to keep us moving. You know, when I was driving to work this morning, a strange thing happened. There was a puppy in the middle of the street, causing traffic to be stopped on both sides of the road. The puppy kept looking around, trying to decide which direction to go as the horns were honking and people were shouting because they were in a hurry. I don't know about each of you, but the pandemic has left me feeling confused, kind of like the puppy. But it's also given us an opportunity to seek out the right direction and build stronger, more resilient communities with the many resources now available. It is my hope that today's workshop, as well as those to come, will arm you with the tools and resources you need to find the best direction for your communities. The Delta Center is the Economic Development Outreach Center for Arkansas State University and is designated a university center by the U.S. Economic Development Administration. Last year, we joined forces with the senior EDA University Center in Arkansas, the Arkansas Economic Development Institute, and together we partnered with the planning and development districts across Arkansas on a COVID recovery and resiliency initiative. This initiative is funded by the U.S. Economic Development Administration. Before we get started with today's presentations, I wanted to take a few minutes to tell you a little bit more about our COVID recovery and resiliency project. Started over a year ago, the goals of the project are to document the historical impact of COVID-19 on Arkansas, and to provide training, documentation, resources, and planning for local governments, schools, small businesses, the healthcare community, manufacturing, and other entities affected by this unprecedented pandemic. The project has three phases: collecting and documenting the historical impact, providing training and resources as identified through the collection of data over the past year, and working with the 8 planning and development districts and their communities to develop a blueprint for economic recovery and resiliency. The information collected over the past year, as well as the reports generated as a result, may be viewed on the Arkansas Recovery and Resiliency website. The link is being put into the chat for you. I think it's already there. This website contains a lot of helpful resources, from business continuity plans to the top 10 issues identified through surveys over the last year. Additionally, on the website, you'll find a link to the dashboard created to compare data of Arkansas, its counties, and peer states, giving a snapshot of the pandemic's impact on a whole range of issues, from small business to mental health to education and infrastructure. We are now in phase 2 of our initiative and kicking it off today with a workshop on community resilience. There will be 7 additional workshops, and all are designed to introduce innovative economic and community development ideas from recognized thought leaders. Also provide access to practical training and tools, link communities and businesses to valuable state and federal resources, and present inventive COVID-19 recovery and resiliency models. A link to the registration and more information is in the chat. The themes and dates for the upcoming workshops are Navigating State and Federal Recovery and Resiliency Resources on September 28th. It looks like they just put all of them into the chat, and so I will just move along. I do want to mention that we have some really good speakers for all of these. We have the head of the National Rural Health Association coming to talk about rural healthcare challenges and solutions. A federal panel where they would be talking about priorities, grants that are available that the EDA Navigator has put together for us. And then we'll have Haggerty Consulting, who will work on strategies that communities may want to use to target some of these grants and help their communities. We have Stone Ward Advertising Agency, who will be doing training on crisis communication. Lots of good things coming up and ending on November the 4th. You may register for all the workshops or each individual workshop as your schedule allows. Again, we have a solid lineup of presenters at each one, and I hope you can join us for all of them. The final phase of our initiative will be the completion of regional blueprints for economic recovery and resiliency. This phase has already started utilizing regional task force that were organized by our planning and development districts. Communities within the regions across Arkansas will be able to utilize the information in the blueprint and develop a plan to fit their specific community. We are grateful to the U.S. Economic Development Administration for helping us undertake this initiative. When we started, we said we wanted to ensure the project would provide tangible assistance to both the public and private sectors that make up our communities. And it is my hope that you will find benefit from today's workshop. Now, a couple quick items before we move into our presenters. The Zoom link will be open all day. You'll use the same login. You may join, leave, and rejoin as needed. Your microphones will be on mute, but feel free to type questions into the chat box. Also, for the best quality viewing of today's workshop, I'm told to set your Zoom view to the standard view. This morning's session will end at 11:30. We'll restart right at 2 o'clock with retail strategies and end around 4. So without further ado, Governor Asa Hutchinson has sent a video message to get us started, and we will cue it up now.
Good morning. I'm Governor Asa Hutchinson. Welcome to the Arkansas Recovery and Resiliency Workshop, which will add to your knowledge of new tools and resources as you prepare to lead in times of difficulty, such as what we've experienced during the pandemic. COVID-19 has touched every aspect of our lives. We have lost loved ones and friends. We've changed the way we educate our children and how we gather for worship and other community activities. Many have lost income or lost a job. In the midst of this, Arkansans have eagerly and unselfishly stood up to help their neighbors. And this is the spirit that will see us through other tough seasons. The Arkansas State University Delta Center for Economic Development, the Arkansas Economic Development Institute at UALR, and the state's planning and development districts are hosting these workshops around the state with the support of the U.S. Department of Commerce Economic Development Administration. These workshops teach community leaders and business leaders to implement new strategies for resiliency and recovery. Thank you for taking the time to attend and for your service to Arkansas.
You've heard me mention the U.S. Economic Development Administration a few times already, and it is an honor to have with us today the Regional Director for EDA's Austin Regional Office, Jorge Ayala. Mr. Ayala is responsible for a 5-state region including Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Texas. He and his service-oriented staff develop and manage the agency's investments to support jobs, private investment, innovation, entrepreneurship, and global competitiveness in the region. George has been with EDA for over 25 years. He has been instrumental in several major innovations that are now EDA standards, such as the multi-year partnership planning grants and the EDA construction post-approval process tool. George, I will turn it over to you to welcome everyone today.
Well, welcome. I hope you can hear me well, and I hope there's no echo. It's great to be with you virtually here this morning to welcome you to the beginning of what I hope will be a fantastic learning experience for all of you. This webinar on COVID recovery and resiliency could not come at a better time. And so I hope you take full advantage of the information that's going to be presented. I'm a bit envious that I can't join you for it. It sounds really, really interesting and impactful. Well, as you know, this 8-part series has been organized by 2 of the EDA partners, our university centers there in Arkansas State Delta Center for Economic Development, and the Arkansas Economic Development Institute at the University of Arkansas Little Rock. Both of these university centers we fund to do economic development work throughout the state of Arkansas. In addition to those 2 entities, we also fund 8 planning and development districts. We designate them as economic development districts, and they cover the entire state of Arkansas. So if you are from Arkansas at this webinar today, you have a district that you're a part of. We fund them to do economic development. do their SEDS process, their economic development strategies. And so I encourage you to work with all of these folks. And they came to us and said, we have an idea that we would love to engage the state in the recovery and resiliency process that we know has hit us all because of COVID. So I'm really excited to see this start and to see the great outcomes that will come from it. You know, it's unfortunate that economic disruption is a part of what we all encounter. If you are in the economic development world, you know that it's inevitable that a storm or a flood, as we're in Texas having some flooding today, or even the unforeseen items like a pandemic can happen. And so as economic developers, we have to prepare for these disruptions. And that's not always easy to do. It's hard to know where do you start? How do you prepare for that? What kinds of things can you do to make your community more resilient to the kind of disasters your area is susceptible to? And so I hope that this series will help you and your community be better prepared as it goes forward. You know, this is the first time that all of the university centers and districts in Arkansas have partnered together and joined forces to put this project together. And so I'm really pleased with that. I think it's fantastic that they are working together. I think that's going to lead to a much more robust and successful series here and long-term outcomes from what you will be learning and speaking about throughout this series. In the next session, the second series webinar, two of my staff will be joining you to get into a lot more detail about EDA and our programs. You're going to hear from April Campbell, who is my economic development representative there for Arkansas, and also Apu Naik, who is our economic development integrator, who covers the entire region, working with multiple federal agencies and collaborating, helping them collaborate together. And so they're going to share with you our priorities, our funding opportunities of EDA in much more detail. But just to give you a little bit of an idea of what EDA is doing right now, EDA was allocated $3 billion in funding through the America Rescue Plan. We call it ARPA. And $3 billion in funding represents the largest funding EDA has ever received. And so we are overwhelmed and excited and hopeful that we can get these dollars to as many communities around our region and around the nation as we can. And so I would encourage you to, if you haven't done this already, to go to eda.gov and look at the page. There's a specific page for the American Rescue Plan. And there have been webinars, several webinars done for each funding source. The $3 billion has been divided into 6 different notices of funding opportunities. Excuse me. And so there have been webinars recorded and posted, as well as frequently asked questions on how to access this funding. And so I would highly encourage you, if you haven't done this already, to go and view those. When April talks in a couple of weeks, I'm sure she'll get into a lot more detail about that. You can also work with your economic development district. They're all well-versed on these programs as well. In closing, I would leave you with 3 keys that I always mention when I'm talking about economic development and really the keys to successful economic development. The first one, and none of these are rocket science or pretty common sense, but the first one is to think regionally. The best projects we find have a regional impact. They may not always be located in your particular community, but can still benefit you, whether it's workers coming from your community that work in other communities that neighbor you, or you're providing some suppliers or subcontractors from your area. So be supportive, work with your communities. Think of regional as regional as you can when looking for good economic development. The second one is just as important, if not more important, And that's, I say collaborate, collaborate, collaborate as much as you can. And I applaud our UCs and our districts for being a great example of collaboration here. Find as many partners as you can to really make your project successful. I talk to communities all the time, and they'll come and present a project. And I can tell you that the most effective presentations are where in the room is the city, the county, the university, the superintendent of schools, private companies, and they're all represented there, and they're all talking about the same project, and they're all excited about what the impact of this project will be for their community. If you collaborate and work with these, with your partners, because you have partners, you're going to have much more success in approaching EDA or any other federal or state agency about funding a project. So highly encourage you to think about who are your partners and can you bring them on board with you as you're putting together an application or you're looking to what you need to do from an economic development standpoint. You will be much more successful. And the last one is to have a good strategy. And EDA, we fund comprehensive economic development strategies. All of our districts do that. So you're all a part of a district, I'm sure, if you're in Arkansas. And so there's already a SED that probably mentions your community and talks about the economic development issues and concerns and strengths and weaknesses that you should focus on. But in addition to that, you can do more localized strategies. And so make sure that you have a good strategy. You know where you're going. You know what your community needs. EDA is, we pride ourselves in knowing about economic development, but we don't know your community. You know your community much better than we do. And so you need to have a strategy that says, this is what our community needs. And I would encourage you to always be thinking strategically there and having a good strategy. So think regionally, collaborate, have a great and a real strategy, not one that you just put on the shelf, but one that really means something to your community. I hope you enjoy the rest of today's sessions. I really envy you, and I know that you're going to have some great speakers today. Take in as much as you can, network with folks that are also going through the same kinds of things you are. And again, have a great rest of your sessions. Thank you so much, Andrea. Appreciate it.
Thank you, George. Thanks for taking the time to be with us today and your words of advice. Our next presenter is Dr. Michael Pakko. He is the Chief Economist and State Economic Forecaster at the Arkansas Economic Development Institute at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. If you have any questions you think of as he's going through his presentation, if you will put them in the chat, we'll try to capture those and get as many answered as possible at the end. Dr. Pakko, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Andrea. And thank you all for being here. It's a great turnout for this event today. And I'm looking forward to sharing with you some of my observations about how the Arkansas economy has fared during this pandemic recession and recovery. Matter of fact, I've subtitled my typical Arkansas economic outlook as in the COVID-19 economy, because quite frankly, everything that's happening in the economy today is in one way or another related to the COVID-19 pandemic and public policy responses to it. Now, officially, the recession associated with our current circumstances lasted only 2 months. The National Bureau of Economic Research, the Business Cycle Dating Committee, dated the previous cyclical peak as February 2020, just before the pandemic hit us. And the recovery began in April of 2020, only 2 months later. So it was the shortest, but yet the sharpest economic downturn we've yet experienced. Recovery is ongoing for the past 17, 18 months at this point. And as I mentioned, it's the COVID-19 pandemic that's really driving economic activity or lack thereof. But I would say that if we're talking about resilience, Arkansas has proven to be fairly resilient in the face of the circumstances we've had to go through over the past several months. Here in Arkansas, the economic downturn last year was not as sharp, not as severe as in many other parts of the country. And reasons are that the restrictions on commerce, at least early on, were much less severe. We didn't have any shelter in place, stay at home orders. There was still businesses open. Of course, restaurants were closed, businesses changed, but there was still an opportunity to get on with life here to some extent. And also the stimulus and relief payments that are coming primarily from the federal government, including the extended unemployment benefits, et cetera, have had a significant impact on consumer spending, which has really helped keep our economy afloat. And that's particularly relevant since Arkansas's cost of living is so low that the one-size-fits-all stimulus payments and benefit payments for unemployment meant that those dollars went further here in Arkansas. It had a more significant impact on consumer spending opportunities. Now, I think the first place to look, and probably the most accurate summary of conditions and how they've developed over the past year and a half, is to look at payroll employment. It's data that we have on a monthly basis. We can compare national to the US, and it's fairly up to date and relatively accurate. And here I've had Arkansas in the US, Arkansas in red, US in blue. They're indexed so that February 2020, the start of the recession basically, is indexed to be a value of 100. So you can compare percentage changes from there. And this chart shows that the US declined in terms of employment by 15% in the first 2 months of the pandemic. Arkansas was only down about 10% over the same period. And since then, we've seen modest to sharp recovery at first, then kind of slowing down, typical long haul approach to back to full employment. As of July, the most recent data available for the state, we were still 1.7% below levels of February 2020, whereas the national average was still down over 3.5% from where we started a year and a half ago. If we look at the breakdown of jobs by sector, we can say that there were some sectors that were hit harder than others. It's probably pretty obvious that accommodation and food services was the one that lost the most jobs, 41,000 jobs in 2 months between February 2020 and April 2020. But other sectors were affected significantly, including retail and professional and business services and healthcare and social assistance. All in all, we lost 127,000 jobs in 2 months. Now, in the subsequent 17 months, from April through July of 2021, we've recovered back 105,000 of those jobs, many of them in the sectors that were hardest hit in the first place, including accommodation and food services and retail trade. Durable goods manufacturing has also been strong. That was a sector that I think was poised to do well before the pandemic hit us. So it's good to see that they're coming out on the other end in relatively good shape. And if we look at the total, what we lost and then how we recovered since then, on net, there are some sectors that are in positive territory, including durable goods manufacturing, financial activities, professional business services. One surprising element on this list is retail trade. There are over 1,000 people more working in retail trade today than there were before the pandemic began. Now, there undoubtedly, the mix of workers is different than it was then. More warehouse work and shipping and things like that, fewer retail store clerks, but we still have net employment up in that industry. The places that are still down, still food services, healthcare and social assistance, and also local government is a big one. That's primarily public schools. Looking ahead, here's the forecast for on-farm payroll employment for Arkansas and the US. In my presentation today, the US forecasts are from IHS Global Insight, and the Arkansas forecasts are also from IHS, but they've been modified to take account of some of the additional information that we have here in state to buttress those forecasts. And we're expecting to see employment to continue to slowly move forward until we should probably get back to the full, or to the rate, the number of employed that we had before the pandemic began right about the second quarter of 2022. We get back to that 100% line. For the US, it's probably not going to be until near the end of 2022 that we see employment regain the level that it was before. If we look at unemployment rates, pretty much a mirror image of employment, although the data are a little bit not as accurate perhaps, because a survey of households has been interrupted during the pandemic. So some of the data is a little bit fuzzy, but basically this shows that the unemployment rate peaked at about 15% nationwide, but only 10% here in Arkansas. And we've seen that come down dramatically with most recent observation, 4.3% here in Arkansas. But on the national level, it's still over 5%. Looking around the state, there were some differences in metropolitan areas. Here, the first set of bars shows April 2020 and compared to the most recent observation for the US. And you can see the only metropolitan area that did worse than the US average was Hot Springs. That was largely because it's a tourist related, it interrupted the horse racing season and all that. But unemployment even there has come back down to about 5%. Is the most recent observation. Some parts of the state, Northwest Arkansas here was at 8.1% at its peak and is now down below 3%. So things have recovered very nicely there. There are still some pockets of high unemployment around the state. Memphis, Pine Bluff, to some extent Texarkana remain elevated. Now, if we look more broadly at the unemployment rates by county, this shows the change from April 19 to April 20. So this shows really how much the unemployment rate increased over that from that year to the peak in 2020. The darker counties show the higher peaks of unemployment or the larger increases in unemployment. And Garland County was one here, Texarkana. If you look around the state, there's somewhat of a tendency for the large increases in unemployment to have happened in metropolitan areas. So here in Pulaski County in central Arkansas, over here in Jonesboro, Fort Smith, even to some extent up in northwest Arkansas, we see the darker colors, meaning larger changes in unemployment. And as a matter of fact, if we break it down into metropolitan and non-metropolitan counties and add them all up, what we see has happened is that the non-metropolitan counties had a higher unemployment rate to begin with, typical during a regular expansion phase of the economy, that the unemployment rate is lower in the metropolitan areas, but the size of the increase was bigger in the metropolitan areas. We peaked at about the same place, close to 10%, but that represented a larger increase in unemployment for the metro areas. And since then, we've come down considerably, but there's still a lot of room to go when it comes to the metro counties. Another interesting breakdown is to look at rural versus urban, which is a slightly different composition. There are some rural counties that are part of metropolitan areas, but if we consider their rural nature rather than their being close to a big city, they're more closely related to the completely rural and mostly rural, are more closely related to one another than they are to the urban areas. And here again, we see that the unemployment rate was lower in the urban areas to begin with, but experienced a larger increase to peak higher than the more rural areas of the state. The mostly and completely rural areas are actually pretty close to the unemployment rates that they had in July 2019, 2 years ago, with a little bit, about a 0.5 percentage point left to make up for in the urban counties. So looking at the forecast for the unemployment rate, kind of a boring looking picture, but if you look at where we're going to get back down to 4%, it's likely to be the first quarter of next year. Here in Arkansas, we'll be down to about 3.5% where we were pre-pandemic by the end of 2022. And it'll take the United States average a little bit more time to get down below that 4% threshold. Now, I'd like to talk a lot about consumer spending because this has really been the interesting part about the recovery phase of this cycle. So Arkansas retail and food services sales would be some data that we'd love to share with you. Unfortunately, there aren't any such data. So we had to make some up ourselves. And we actually found some very good, thorough data. It's not great, but we were able to work with it There are monthly reports on county sales tax receipts that are distributed from the Department of Finance and Administration to the counties and municipalities that charge sales taxes in Arkansas. And they break it down by county, by industry code. And so what we were able to do is take these data, aggregate them all up, convert to common units of taxable sales in order to create Arkansas Retail Sales Series that also has detail on the sectoral level. And it's what we intend it to be is directly comparable to the Census Bureau's retail sales statistics. So here's what we came up with after working with these data. The dashed line is the raw data itself. You can see the periodic spikes associated with Christmas shopping in December, followed by declines in January and February. The solid purple line is we use some standard statistical techniques to seasonally adjust and make so that we get rid of those periodic predictable spikes around Christmas time. And a couple of things to notice about this is that there's a little bit of a jump here in 2019. That's not actually an increase in retail sales. That was when out-of-state internet sales vendors had to start reporting and turning in sales tax receipts. So that's more sales were reported then, although sales didn't necessarily change. We estimate that to have been about 5%. What was real significant here is that the downturn doesn't appear to be too big here in early 2020. And really for the rest of 2020 and certainly into 2021, we've seen great increases in consumer spending. If we compare it to the US, here blue is the US, red is Arkansas. The census data show that consumer spending in April of last year dropped over 20% on a nationwide basis. Here in Arkansas in March, it declined maybe 4 or 5%, but it already started to recover in April and was back up in positive territory, up 10% from pre-pandemic levels by May and June of 2020, and has remained elevated ever since, with recent spending going as high as 25 to 30% higher than before the pandemic hit. Now, one of the key elements of this was a very rapid increase in automobile sales. And it happened in April of 2020, or it started in April of 2020. I've seen very high frequency data on credit card purchases, and certainly retail sales were suppressed all through March and into first half of April. But pretty much as soon as the first round of stimulus checks started coming around, we started to see an increase in spending, and automobiles was one of the first places that showed up. It's been extended considerably as we've moved through the recovery phase, and most recently, it looks like we're about 25 to 30% above pre-pandemic levels in auto sales. Non-store retailers, this is online shopping, internet sales primarily. You can see here is a big increase in 2019 where we saw the sales tax regime change. From that point forward, everything should be consistent. And nationwide, we've seen the internet sales basically increase 25 to 40%. Here in Arkansas, it's been more like 50 to 80%. There's a lot of volatility in these data, but clearly we're seeing a lot more shopping on the internet than we did before the pandemic. And this is one of those trends that's likely to persist beyond the recovery. Another that might persist beyond the recovery is food and beverage stores. Back in March of 2020, we had a spike when everyone rushed out to buy supplies and toilet paper. But since then, sales at food and beverage stores have been 10 to 15% higher than they were before February of 2020. And that trend, if anything, is increasing a little bit in 2021. So if people might have established new habits of cooking at home more often and going out to restaurants less often, we might see this pattern persist. Building materials, garden equipment, and supplies is really an interesting one because spending in this sector really took off as soon as the pandemic hit. It's almost as soon as people were locked up at home, let's find something to do at home like garden or improve do-it-yourself projects. And so we saw huge increases nationally, 15 to 20%, here in Arkansas, 25 to 35%. Now, there was a big downward downturn, and this is present in some of the other charts as well, in February of 2021. That was associated with the snowstorm that we all experienced. that particularly hit Arkansas hard, and in this sector as well. But other than that brief interruption, this sector has been growing strong. Excuse me. Even food service and drinking places. Arkansas, we saw our restaurants go to delivery and takeout and drive-through. And so sales at food and services and drinking places recovered fairly rapidly. By the second half of 2020, they were back to normal in Arkansas, at least the level of sales, whereas it really wasn't until just early 2021, March or April, where nationally we saw food service and drinking places recover to the level that they had been on the national level. Most recent observations show that here in Arkansas, we're 15 to 20% above 2019 averages. One more sector I wanted to mention, and that's gasoline stations. This is the one area where we did see a downturn in spending as severe as that across the rest of the nation. But really that reflects the declining gasoline prices as much as fewer miles driven. And so as prices have recovered, we've seen that spending increase again. But it's a little bit different than the other sectors because for one thing, because gasoline prices were lower, that frees up more resources for consumers to spend on other goods. So we've seen some of that show through in the other sectors that we looked at here. Also, gasoline is not subject to sales tax. So when it comes to the fiscal position of municipalities, counties around the state who depend in large part on sales tax receipts, the gasoline sales aren't going to matter so much. So we can look at a total of retail sales excluding gasoline and get a better idea of how the fiscal impact of sales tax changes have been on counties and municipalities. And the downturn in March and April of 2020 was just not even there. It's not statistically relevant. What persists when we look at this measure after we remove gasoline is that overall retail sales have been up sharply throughout the recovery period, and especially March, April, and May through June of this year. We were up 25 to 30% from 2019 levels. So consumer spending, if nothing else, has been resilient. Now, why is that? Well, we've had opportunity, motive, and means. The opportunity, the economic shutdowns, as I mentioned, were not as draconian here as in other parts of the country. Consumers had more time at home, more time to kill, more things to do. So home production, home improvement projects seemed to be one of the things that people took up. And the means, government transfer payments boosted overall purchasing power all across the state. And in a state where we have a very low cost of living, that spending was a significant proportionate increase. And so if we look, for instance, at personal income without transfer payments, without the stimulus checks, et cetera, there's a sharp decline in 2020, down 6% nationwide and down 4.2% here in Arkansas. Excuse me just a minute. Computer problem. But we're really back on a recovery path as of the first quarter of 2021. Skip that. Now, if we look at current transfer receipts, on the other hand, huge spikes, up 60 to 80% in the second quarter of 2020. And then when the next round of the stimulus checks came out at the beginning of this year, an even larger surge in total transfer receipts distributed to households around the country. And so as a result, total personal income did not experience a downturn at all, quite the opposite. In the second quarter of 2020, total personal income was up nearly 8% nationwide and over 10% here in Arkansas. That's in one quarter. It came back down to sustainable levels during the 2020, but by the beginning of this year, we got the next round of stimulus checks. We're up 12.5% to 16%. So if we look at the forecast moving forward, ignoring those transfer receipts, things are already back to normal and we're moving back onto a sustainable path. The transfer receipts are likely to dissipate here in the second, third quarters of this year, and we'll be back to a more sustainable growth path in personal income by 2022. And as a result, if we look at the forecast for retail sales, there's going to have to be a little bit of a retrenchment at least. Now, I'm hoping that this forecast is a little bit overly pessimistic and that it shows a steady decline over the next several quarters in consumer spending just to get us back to a sustainable level. It might occur over a longer period of time. It might not have to go as far as it is here. But still, even at the end of 2022, when things are back to somewhat normal, I suppose, we're still 18% above pre-pandemic levels in overall consumer spending. So that's a positive development, a positive position to work from moving forward from there. Risks to the forecast, of course, there are things that could happen in the near term that could interrupt the current status. If COVID gets worse and there are more restrictions, that could have economic impacts. If consumer confidence wanes at the same time that the stimulus money is running out, we can see a sharper decline in consumer spending. And we've seen an awful lot of supply disruptions around the world that are keeping us from getting to a fully functioning economy in the near term. In the longer term, all the money that was spent or borrowed to create the stimulus spending could create pressures in debt markets, cause upward pressure on interest rates, which would be exacerbated if the Federal Reserve has to step in and put a lid on inflation, if that turns out to be another secondary consequence in the longer run. So these are things to keep an eye on things that could prevent the economy from moving forward into a more standard recovery mode after, say, middle of next year. But as long as things don't happen that are unexpected, it looks like we're well on the path toward moving back toward what is going to be the new normal. But as I suggested in a couple of places, there might be some differences in the way things happen post-COVID than they did before. But again, that will be interesting to see. Well, with that, I will stop my presentation. I know I've run over, we're running a little bit behind time, but I'll leave it to the organizers to see if we want heavy time for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Pakko. There was one question from Andy Shatley that maybe you could answer briefly. How has the average MSA pay rates been affected during the recovery period versus pre-COVID averages?
Well, the averages are interesting because one of the things that we observed is during the really low employment phase in April 2020, it was a lot of low income workers who lost their jobs. The higher income people who are working at home, telecommuting, things like that, were still working. And so statistically, we saw a large decline or an increase in average weekly wages, because the higher paid workers were still working, lower paid workers were on furlough. That's dissipated somewhat now, so the averages are a little bit more representative. But one of the slides that I skipped through because we were running short on time was one that showed wages and salaries versus dividends and income versus proprietors' income. And wage and salary income experienced a little bit of a dip in 2020, but has grown pretty significantly since then. The people who took the real hard hit early in the recession were proprietors, sole business proprietors, but even that has bounced back so that actually wages have been increasing and income from wages has been increasing over the past 3 or 4 quarters.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Pakko, and thank you for spending time with us today and just kind of setting up all of our webinar series with your economic data. We appreciate it. If you'd like to put a link to your blog or website in the chat, I think people would probably really like to know how to get there. So thank you.
Thank you.
I know we have several joining us now from around the country to listen to our next presenter, so welcome. Charles Marohn is the founder and president of Strong Towns. He is a professional engineer and a land use planner with decades of experience. He holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and a master of urban and regional planning, both from the University of Minnesota. Mr. Marohn is the author of 2 books, Strong Towns, A Bottom-Up Revolution to Rebuild American Prosperity, and a recent release, Confessions of a Recovering Engineer. In addition to these books, he hosts the Strong Towns podcast and is a primary writer for Strong Towns web content. Mr. Marohn has presented Strong Towns concepts in hundreds of cities and towns across North America, and we are very appreciative that he took the time to be with us today. So, Mr. Marohn, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Andrea. I really appreciate that. It is nice to be here. I lament that we're not able to be in person, and maybe we'll get to do that soon. I understand why we're not, but boy, It is a treat to be able to chat with all of you. It's been a while actually since I've been to Arkansas, and I do hope to get back soon. We have a lot of Strong Towns members there and a lot of key supporters, so it's nice to be able to share this with you. And yeah, we're gonna have a fun time today, even though we can't hang out in person. I want to start with a concept from our first book about complex adaptive systems, because it does kind of set a framework for the way we at Strong Towns think about a lot of these issues. If we think about a rainforest we understand is a complex adaptive system. We can look at the different flora and fauna in a rainforest, and we understand that they all act independently of each other. They all adjust and react in real time to stresses and opportunities in their environment. When we look at a rainforest, we recognize that there is an order to it, but the order is not one that is imposed. It's one that emerges. It emerges from all these complex interactions. It's easy for us to think of a rainforest as a complex system, but oftentimes we don't appreciate how human habitat, particularly human habitat of the pre kind of Great Depression era, was itself a complex adaptive systems. Cities grew incrementally. They were the result of many different people independently taking action with stresses and opportunities. When we look at these systems, there's certainly an order to them, but that order is one that emerges from a set of kind of base rules and base interactions to create these very complex type of adaptations. The complex systems are different from systems that are merely complicated. When we look at a Rube Goldberg machine, we understand that it's very complicated, right? There's a lot of stuff going on here. The complication is part of the novelty of a Rube Goldberg machine. But we know that if we cut one of these strings or move one of these blocks, the machine just stops working, right? If your automobile engine is stressed beyond its design criteria, it's not going to transform into a wash machine or a toaster. It's just going to break, despite the people who put it together being really, really smart, despite everything that's been done to make that machine work really well. This is the difference between systems that are complex and systems that are merely complicated. If we take a rainforest and we subject it to an excessive amount of rain or excessive amount of sun in any one season, that rainforest won't fail. It will change and adapt and evolve. But it doesn't fail. But if we do that same thing to a cornfield, if it gets too much sun or too much rain, it doesn't change and become soybeans. It doesn't evolve to become potatoes. It just fails at being corn. It fails at doing what it was designed to do. We can look at human habitat in the same way. When we create human habitat that is inherently flexible, adaptable, and kind of has this incremental chassis that it can change over time on. What we see is that in times that are good, in times that are bad, in times that are difficult, times that are prosperous, we can watch these cities evolve and change, but they endure. They are strong. They stick around. When we look at cities that are built all at once to a finished state, that lack that inherent adaptability and flexibility, where a rigidness is imposed, almost mechanical-like, on the landscape through zoning, through other regulation, through financing, and just through cultural preference. What we see are neighborhoods that become fragile. If you can't evolve and change and respond to stress, you are inherently a fragile system, regardless of how complicated that system is. I want to talk a little bit about, well, let me delve into this. When we look at, this relationship between complex and complicated, this is my hometown. I'm actually speaking to you from the junior high school that I went to school in. Is now an office building and artist studio. I've got one of the studios here. In this my hometown of Brainerd, Minnesota. This is what my city looked like back in 1871. And if you can do the math real quick, you recognize that this is actually our 150th year anniversary. So we're having a celebration of sorts here over the course of this year. This is how it started. And the fascinating thing about this start, or the thing that's worth noting about this start, is that this is how every city that ever came into existence prior to kind of the modern era, the post-World War II development era. This is how every single one came into existence. Some people got together. They thought it might be a good place to build a city. They started out with some pop-up shacks, some hopes and some dreams about the future. A lot of these places never got past this point, right? All those complex variables that make a place work just didn't come together, and the city would fail. And when it failed, it wasn't a catastrophe. It wasn't some, global disaster, or it didn't destroy the national economy. A few people lost a little bit of money. They would salvage what they can and they would move on. But when all those complex variables came together and you would get a place that started to become more and more successful, what would happen is that more people would move to this place. The actual underlying land would become more valuable with more people wanting to be there. There's actually a rising land value that would occur. At the same time, these buildings would start to fall apart. They were not, built to endure. They were just kind of a startup little experiment. And so this combination of rising land values and declining building values would create this natural redevelopment pressure. And over a generation, the street would be transformed into a street that looked like this. This is the exact same street roughly 34 years later. You can see now we have structures that are more substantial. If you would go a couple blocks off of this, you would see buildings that were in that pop-up phase. The city was growing incrementally up, incrementally out, and becoming incrementally more intense. As more and more people would move to this community, the center of town would become more valuable. Again, the land values would go up as you go out. They would become more and more valuable over time. These buildings lasted longer than the prior buildings, but even they would start to deteriorate and decline over time. That combination of rising land values and declining structure values would again create that natural redevelopment pressure. People would buy these buildings, redevelop them, and you would ultimately end up with these buildings of concrete, and granite. This is the same exact street roughly 40 years later. This is a process that we see repeated over and over again around the world. You can think of a culture in a petri dish growing incrementally up, incrementally out, and becoming incrementally more intense over time. And this is the way that our habitat, cities, have grown for thousands and thousands of years. We can go back and look across different civilizations, across different cultures, and we can see a similar pattern repeated over and over again. We began to do something different in the 20th century, and we're going to talk a little bit about why here in a second, but I want to show you what this street looks like today. Today, this is the exact same street from roughly the same spot that those wood buildings were taken from. It is a collection of half-occupied buildings and parking lots. For the sake of our conversation today, I want to point out there's $500,000 of public investment in this street right here. If you look at the pavement, the sidewalk, the curb, the drainage systems, the sewer, the water, the streetlights, you add all that up, and these two blocks that you're looking at right here, there's about $500,000 that we have invested as a community in this place. Where is the wealth that is going to allow us to sustain that investment? Where's the money going to come from for us to go out and fix this street, maintain these pipes, maintain these sidewalks, take care of all this stuff? That wealth used to be there. It used to be there in great amounts. It's not there anymore. And this is the transformation that has taken place in our cities in the modern era, in the post-World War II development pattern. I want to have you pause here and think about this shift that we've made, the shift from the complex adaptive system growing incrementally over time, becoming thicker, becoming more mature, becoming financially more productive, to something like this, something that is really more emaciated, something that lacks that wealth to sustain itself. I like to, or I encourage people to, and I try to practice this myself, always have the most generous of interpretations of the motivations of people in the past. I spent time talking to my grandfather about the Great Depression. He grew up during the Great Depression. He was a Marine in World War II. He was one of the first groups, or he was the first wave into Nagasaki after the bomb was dropped. So that gives you a sense of his age. He told me that he lived in a barn in the Great Depression. The neighboring family allowed him to sleep in the barn, and they would feed him if he would help them work the fields on their farm. He actually said he felt very lucky. I tell that story because I think sometimes, we get an antiseptic view of what the Great Depression was like. The people who lived with it, this was a time of extreme hardship. Most important about the Great Depression, people at the time didn't know what caused it. Even today, we have disagreements about what caused it. You can read different economists with different theories, and the theories all sound very good, very solid, even though they disagree with each other fundamentally. And more urgent, people didn't know how to get out of the Great Depression, right? There was a series of things, and this is, the New Deal project was a series of things that we tried to get us out of this economic malaise that we found ourselves in, this breakdown of a complex economic system. The thing that, the middle school history books tell us got us out of the Great Depression was, of course, World War II. World War II got the economy moving again, got GDP up, got unemployment down. And somehow, the lesson of this is celebrated that, we just kickstarted the economy and it got us out of this depression. But if you step back and look at it, none of us really pine for a world war, right? I mean, of course, if we take millions of people, ship them off overseas to kill and to die, we take millions of other people, we put them to work, building the implements of war, the ships, the planes, the munitions. We ration bread and butter and meat and gas. We can, bump up gross domestic product. That's very easy to do. That doesn't really feel like prosperity, right? That doesn't feel like something we pine for or we're trying to build towards. Nonetheless, the economists around FDR became very concerned as the war was winding down, as it became clear that we would ultimately win the war. It was just going to be a matter of time. The economists around FDR started to freak out, and they were freaking out because they recognized that nothing was fundamentally different about the economy. Nothing had really changed. If we were to demobilize these millions of troops and shut down these industries of war, and the war ended and we were victorious, we were just going to slide economically right back into 1935. Nothing had really changed. Of course, with hindsight, we recognize that that's not what happened, right? What happened is that we created something different. At the end of World War II, we were the only major industrial power not decimated by war. We were, in a sense, the last country standing. We had literally the gold, right? We had accumulated the gold of other nations. We had the world's reserve currency backed by our gold. We were pumping more oil out of the ground than Saudi Arabia. We had a culture united around defeating common enemies, where the divisions that we see today in society were there was much more unity of purpose and unity of spirit. We took all of this asset that we had, we took all of this capital that we had, and we poured it into creating a new version of America, a new version of America that could create prosperity for everyone, that would build a middle class, that would keep us out of the depths of the Great Depression and put us on a new course for prosperity. This is what we did. And the amazing thing, and I think this should be noted by everyone, the amazing thing is that it worked. We transformed our cities into a kinetic growth machine, one that built a middle class, created this unprecedented period of prosperity, this period of time that we still nostalgize today as kind of the glory years after World War II. Let me show you what this looks like, because this will be familiar to all of you. This is a map of Fresno, California. I use Fresno as an example because we've got good maps of Fresno, but you're going to see your city, regardless of its size, reflected in this map. What you see here in yellow are the boundaries of Fresno, California in the late 1800s. And I'm going to show you over time how this changes. Here's that incremental development pattern, that pre-Great Depression pattern of development. Here's Fresno in 1909. Here we go into the early 1920s. Now we're in the middle of the Great Depression and then the end of the World War. You can see how Fresno has grown incrementally. You've got this incremental up, incremental out, this thickening up and it becoming more intense. This is that traditional development pattern that we've seen at play for thousands of years, that complex adaptive system creating human habitat. Now we turn cities into a kinetic growth machine. We want to stay out of the depression. We want to grow our economy. We want to experience that growth at a large level. And the best way to do that is to energize growth in our cities. And so we start to invest in infrastructure. We start to invest in subsidizing homes. We start to invest in subsidizing commercial real estate transactions. And we really kickstart our cities. And here's what happens. 1958, here's 1970, here's the mid 1980s. Here's a shot from the 1990s. And then here's the boundaries of Fresno in 2010. I look at my little city here in central Minnesota. And at the end of World War II, I'll note that we were roughly 13,500 people. Today, my little town is 13,500 people, but we're 10 times the size. We're 10 times the area. And this is, indicative of what this system has done at the local level. It is very easy for us to generate GDP growth. It is very easy for us to, at the macro level, experience growth and job creation, if we are willing to, at the local level, take on enormous liabilities. This is some data that we put together from Lafayette, Louisiana. I was part of a large study in Lafayette to look at their development pattern and the impacts of their development pattern on their budget and on the overall kind of fiscal capacity of the community. So at the end of World War II, Lafayette, Louisiana had a population of a little over 33,000. Today, it's over 120,000. It's a 3.5 times increase in population. This is a robust level of growth, right? But when we look at the end of World War II and we say, okay, what did it take to provide water to the people of Lafayette? At the end of World War II, in that complex adaptive framework, it was taking 5 feet of pipe per person. Today, it takes 50 feet of pipe per person, a 10 times increase. What did it take to provide fire protection? Well, at the end of World War II, it was 2.4 hydrants per 1,000 people. Today, it's 21 times that amount. And so you can look and you see that while we grew our population very robustly, it took much more input, much more stuff in order to experience that growth. We grew our liabilities by 10x and by 20x. Now we have all this water system to maintain. We have all these hydrants to maintain. We have this vast amount of city to maintain. And while that amount of liability has grown to a large degree, our population hasn't grown nearly as much. Now, I think it's logical for us to say, but Chuck, we live much more prosperous lives today, right? We have bigger homes. We have a higher quality of life. We have, a greater level of prosperity. And, I acknowledge that to a degree, but I think the question that we have to ask, particularly at the local level, is how much of that is real? When we step back and we look at our cities, what we see is that we're able to grow our population by taking on greater and greater levels of long-term liability, of promises and things that we say we will maintain and take care of. But what we don't see is we don't see that family wealth increasing. In Lafayette, the median household income is only up 1.6 times. Our liabilities are up 10 times and 20 times. We don't see family wealth growing. In fact, we see family wealth, median household net wealth, at its lowest point post-World War II, with debts increasing and many, many more families having a negative net worth. This is not what prosperity is supposed to look like. I want to walk through how this development pattern has really been done at the expense of local balance sheets, at the expense of our local capacity, because we're debating right now today a massive infrastructure bill at the federal level. We're going to spend trillions of dollars. There's all this rhetoric about economic growth and about investing in America and about creating, kind of recreating that post-World War II prosperity with these massive infrastructure investments. I want you to understand why this kind of prosperity is elusive at the local level. Why, when we did this in 2008, to a large degree, it didn't actually solve any of these problems. I want you to take a look at these two blocks right here. These blocks are just up the street from me right now. This is in my hometown of Brainerd. If you look at these two blocks, what you're looking at is something that would have been at the far edge of the community in the 1920s. As my community was growing incrementally up, incrementally out, and becoming incrementally more intense, it was these three blocks that were the increment of out. This neighborhood was the far edge of town. And what you had built here is something that looked like this image on the left. That block on the left is really the 1920s equivalent of the pop-up shack, right? Those pop-up shacks I showed you earlier. This is what that would have looked like in the 1920s. And the people who built this assumed, right, that over time, their buildings would become more intense. The land values would go up. They would get second and third stories. It would become more ornate. They would build their wealth while the community grew and got wealthier. Of course, that didn't happen. These were built, then you had the Great Depression, then you had World War II, and then you had this completely new experiment, this different style of development that just skipped right over these blocks and started building further out on the edge of town. These three blocks have stagnated for almost a century. The block on the right used to look just like the block on the left. We were able to get that torn down and we got something brand new put in. We got the Taco John's. I explained this to my non-Minnesotans. This is, you can think of as Norwegian Mexican food, right? So we got this in. We were very excited about this transaction, right? We got rid of blight. We got something that is shiny and new. We got something that met all the zoning codes, all the parking requirements, all the sign ordinances, the floor area ratios that met the building codes. It reinforced the idea that, we were going to become more prosperous. We could get rid of blight and we could get something that was more modern, something that better met our current development pattern, desires, and trajectory. The problem is, and nobody bothered to look at this at the time, if you look at that block on the left, and you add up all those properties, what you see is that it has a value of $1.1 million. If you look at that block on the right, it's the same size area. It's the same amount of public infrastructure investment. It's the same essentially cost to us as a community to maintain over time. It has a value of only $600,000. Understand what you're looking at. On the left is the traditional pattern of development. It's the way that we built cities incrementally. It's that complex adaptive system. It is that pattern in its infant state after nearly a century of neglect and decline. And it still is outperforming by a wide margin the stuff we're building brand new today. We all understand what's going to happen to that building on the right. We've all been around long enough to see this trajectory, right? In a couple of decades, that cheaply built building will be in disrepair. It will likely be boarded up. There'll be a new taco place up the road somewhere, and we'll be looking for some type of tax subsidy to get someone to come in and tear it down and redevelop it. This is a pattern that we see repeated over and over and over again. I use that example of the Taco John's because it's a very compelling case study. It's a way for us to get our minds around the trade-offs that we make at the local level when we develop in this style. But I want to show you that this is part of a broader trend. This is Buffalo, New York. What I'm going to show you right now is the financial productivity of different neighborhoods in Buffalo, New York. If you think of financial productivity, you can think of a farmer going and spreading seed across a field. And the parts of the field that grow up the most robustly, we say that that's the most productive part of the field, right? Like that's where we get the most bushels per acre. So where in a city do we get the most value per acre? Where do we have the most financial productivity? And I start with Buffalo because I've got a soft spot for Buffalo, but Buffalo is one of these places that has experienced just a century of decline. Buffalo at the beginning of the 20th century was an amazing city, but one of the wealthiest cities in North America. Buffalo has lost population every year since World War II. It's been a steady downward decline. Lots of neglect, Their downtown, their core neighborhoods have suffered a lot of decline. Yet when we step back and we say, where's the wealth in Buffalo? Where's the greatest financial productivity? You can clearly see that the core downtown, the surrounding neighborhoods, the stuff that was built in that complex adaptive framework, that original human habitat, is, despite the decline and neglect, a massive repository of wealth. In fact, the wealth that the community has built in these places vastly outstrips everything that we have built since. This is a pattern we see repeated over and over across North America. My friends at Urban 3, a firm out of Asheville, had done this modeling, and they will show you again and again that it doesn't matter if it is a northern city or a southern city. It doesn't matter if it's a coastal city or an inland city. It doesn't matter if it's a big, small, liberal, conservative, like none of this matters. What we see over and over again is that when we can find that pre-Great Depression pattern of development, that pattern of development that was at its core strong, adaptable, flexible, what we see is even when it's neglected, even when it's occupied by the poorest people in the community, it financially is a gold mine. It financially is incredibly productive. And the stuff we built today has the characteristics of slash and burn agriculture. It's something that burns very bright for a very short period of time. And then it leaves us with a lot of liabilities. It leaves us with a lot of ongoing costs and ongoing expense, and not nearly enough wealth to sustain that. It is literally bankrupting our cities, pushing us into insolvency, taking away our financial options as we go. I want to talk for the rest of the time that I've got here about how we do things differently. If you're interested in this diagnosis and the data behind this and this conversation, we put out a whole book called Strong Towns. I'll show you that at the end that goes through this. But the question that I always get is, okay, Chuck, we recognize the trade-offs, but we're stuck right now. We need growth. Our community needs to experience growth. And if we don't experience growth, we will fall apart. We have all of these liabilities. We have all this stuff that we said we will do. How do we, change our approach without experiencing collapse or enormous levels of hardship? There's a couple of things that I'm going to give you today that will put you on a better path. The first one is this one here in front of us, the next increment by right. When we think of cities as this complex adaptive system, what we recognize is that in order for them to be healthy, in order for them to be prosperous, they need to evolve. They need to be able to adapt. They need to be able to change. If you look at the way we build today, we go out and we build entire developments. We build them all at once, and we build them to a finished state. In other words, we imagine that when it's built, it is done. There will be no next version, no next rendition. There's no sense that it will adapt or evolve or change over time. We have built it in a sense in its perfect form, and it is done. I want you to think about that, the mindset or that approach for a second, because if we go out and we build a new subdivision, let's say we build 10 homes or 20 homes or 50 homes or 200 homes or 2,000 homes, all within a few years of each other, all in the same place. What we recognize is that right away, there's a huge benefit to the community, right? Generally, the developer will pay all the costs. Those costs will be rolled into the mortgages and rolled into the financing. Individuals will assume those costs. The businesses that buy the commercial real estate will assume those costs and make payments on them over time. The community, by extension, gets all this growth. So they get the jobs of building this stuff. They get the permit fees and all the transaction fees that go along with it. And then they get all this new tax base. So in property tax systems, they'll get more money coming in. And in sales tax systems, they'll just have more people. They'll have more transactions in the community, and they will get more money that way. The liabilities sitting there under the ground, the pipes, the pumps, the meters, the roads, the sidewalks, the streets, all of this stuff is brand new. And so there's no real cost to the community in year one, right? The costs sit out a decade or two from now. But look at that collection of houses. what we witness or what we see is that it will be kind of the place to be for a while. But then when we get out, 20, 25 years, everybody's driveway will go bad at the same time. Everybody's house in this development will need new siding at the same time. Everybody will need a new roof at the same time. They were all built at the same time. And so all of it fails at the same time. All of it experiences distress at the same time. Everybody's appliances will need to be redone, replaced at the same time. And so what we see is that this new development goes through a generation of prosperity. It's the place to be. It's the place where all the wealthy people live. It's the new up and coming neighborhood. And then you will have another generation of, in a sense, hanging on. Can we, get enough people here who have wealth and affluence that they'll go out and maintain this place and take care of stuff and keep it all going? Can we borrow enough money? Can we create enough growth in some other place to give us the cash flow to come back here and take care of this stuff? But if you go further out in time, you start to not only have these liabilities kind of overwhelm, but the fact that you can't take care of, you can't renew, you can't, reinvigorate those neighborhoods means that there's a cap on how much wealth can be created in that place. And when you run that out over time, it may take a generation, it may take 2 generations, it may take more. There's only one possible destination, and that is failure. That is falling apart. This is very different than traditional development patterns. And I talked about that redevelopment pressure that we would get in neighborhoods naturally. I want you to think about at a family level what one of these transactions might look like. There's an infinite number of ways this can go down. But let me walk you through one scenario just to help you get your mind around it. Let's say we have a family that has a house with a leaky roof that they need to fix. They don't have the money to fix the roof, but the roof has to be fixed because if you don't fix a leaky roof, it will literally destroy your house. Your house will start to, fall apart at the seams and you will be left with nothing. So this becomes an urgent crisis. What do? We don't have the money, but we need to fix this thing urgently. Well, traditionally, a family could have done something like this. They could have said, we don't have the money to fix this, but we do have a spare bedroom. We have a spare bedroom because we had a kid here who's now grown up and moved out. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take that spare bedroom. We're going to put an outside door. We're going to put a little kitchenette and a little bathroom in there, and we're going to rent it out. We'll rent it out to someone who needs an efficiency apartment. Or we'll, convert it into a bed and breakfast, and we'll rent out the room by the night. We'll invite someone to come in and stay in our house and be able to earn that income. And we'll use that money we bring in from, changing our house and modifying our house. We'll use that money to fix the roof. This was very common, very, very common. People would build their own wealth and equity in their building. And then they would use that wealth and equity to be able to, make ends meet, to make things work in their neighborhood, to make their own life situation work out. Today, you might build that wealth and equity, maybe. Maybe that neighborhood will appreciate in value and you can cash out that wealth and you can use that. You can take on, in a sense, more debt to fix that roof. But that's a very, very different trajectory. That's a debt that you're going to carry with you now, as opposed to equity that you're going to build that's going to give you something else. If we want to recapture that complex adaptive framework, if we want to experience growth in our communities, but growth that does not make us poorer over time, that does not increase our liabilities, but growth that allows our places to thicken up and become more prosperous and more successful, we have to be willing to allow the next increment of development intensity by right throughout our entire communities. There's a couple of technical little words in there. Let me break them down for those that are not familiar with the way zoning works. A by right development is one where you can essentially walk in at 9 a.m. with a completed permit application and walk out by noon with a permit. It's by right. You don't have to go to special boards and committees. You don't have to ask permission of all your neighbors. You don't have to genuflect in front of a council. You just get to do this because we've said as a community, you get to do this. If we want that complex adaptive framework, which we want in our communities, which we need to have in order for them to grow strong and resilient, we need to allow everywhere at all times the neighborhoods to adapt and change. Let me give you a concrete example of this. If you have a neighborhood of single-family homes, there should be no regulatory friction at all in that neighborhood of single-family homes evolving over the next generation to become a neighborhood of duplexes. Now, I want to throw this statement in because this is something that we always append to the idea of adaptive systems and incremental development. And that is this: no neighborhood should experience radical change, but no neighborhood should be exempt from change. A lot of times we resist the thickening up of our neighborhoods, the gradual evolution of our places, because what we see in our development pattern is that new growth is not something we want near us. Because we artificially suppress change, because we tend to lock our neighborhoods in regulatory amber and not allow them to flex and move, what we see is that the outcome for neighborhoods tends to be one of two things. One is complete failure, a place falling apart, a place in decline. And a lot of times the changes that happen in those neighborhoods are changes for the negative, right? People coming in and becoming slumlords, riding that cycle of decline down, shifting the pattern of development in ways that we don't like. The other option that we see in the landscape, though, is radical change. The neighborhood's in decline. The neighborhood is cheap and affordable to buy in. So I'm going to buy 2 houses, tear them down, and build a big apartment building. Or I'm going to buy a couple of homes and put in a bunch of condo units. I'm going to radically change the neighborhood in ways that is unrecognizable for the people that are there now. The goal then becomes, I don't want to be that neighborhood. Let's make it some other neighborhood. Let's use whatever power we have to influence the zoning board or the board of commissioners, to influence the financing or what have you, so that that doesn't become my neighborhood. This is a very unhealthy way to build a city. The reality is that all of our neighborhoods need to thicken up. Our communities are financially insolvent. We have more long-term commitments than we have community wealth to sustain them. And so the compromise here, or the strategy here to, in a sense, get our financial resiliency back, is to allow our neighborhoods that incremental change over time. No neighborhood should experience radical change. Nobody should leave, come back 2 decades later and not be able to recognize the place where they were from. But simultaneous with that is that no neighborhood can be exempt from change. No neighborhood can be put under glass and protected from all outside force and change, particularly when that is financially disastrous to the overall community. Along with this, we need to have a conversation about how we lower the bar of entry across the board throughout our communities. We have done something in the post-World War II affluence that is very pernicious. If you look back at traditional cities, what you see is that they had a lot of poor people, but all those poor people had the option to, and I think, conservatives often call this bootstrapping. That term has gotten a bad name recently. I kind of still like it. The idea here was that everyone had the opportunity in the community to start with nothing, and through their own labor and devices, ultimately end up with something. If you think of the traditional development pattern, you look at like the original city here at Brainerd, I've got up on the thing, you could have built one of these things very cheaply. And you could have at any point in the city's evolution prior to the suburban experiment, this post-war experiment, you could have built a small house out on the edge on cheap property. And as the community itself grew as a whole, your investment, your effort would result in you accumulating wealth and the community itself becoming wealthier. There was a relationship between you doing well individually and the community doing well as a whole. We have, for many, many reasons, raised the bar of entry now today. We have said, if you want to fully participate in society, you have to cross these certain bars and thresholds. And let me give you an example of this. This is something that in my city, we call a tiny house. In the past, my ancestors would have called this a house. The reason why we've put the phrase tiny on the front of this is really a function of our financial and regulatory systems. Right now, if you want to build a tiny house, which essentially is a starter home, if you want to build a starter home in my city, you have to meet all the requirements of a house, plus you have to meet subpart A through M of the tiny house provisions. You have to notify all your neighbors and let them come to a meeting and say why this should never happen. You have to go genuflect in front of boards and commissions and ask permission, all to build what our ancestors would have said is a starter home, right? And why is this a starter home? Because you could get into a small piece of land with a small house very cheaply and affordably. As you accumulated your own wealth and capacity and resources, you had a kid you could add on to the back. You had another kid, you put on the second story. The neighbor comes over and helps you. You go over and help your neighbor. This is a traditional way that cities grew and evolved over time, building individual wealth while we built community wealth. Today we'll say you can't build this. This is an anomaly. You can go out and get a 30-year mortgage, which itself has lots of ramifications. You have to have a job history. You have to have a certain level of income. You've got to have a whole bunch of things that a large percentage of our society just don't have and are never going to have. And so without that, you can't fully participate in society. If we lower the bar of entry, if we look at this for what it is, not some type of weird anomaly that we should keep out of our neighborhoods, but actually the reasonable place for people getting started to start building wealth and participating in our society, we will have a much more, a much greater track for prosperity for people. Let me give you an analog of this on the commercial side. These are storage sheds that were put up in Muskegon, Michigan. Muskegon, Michigan, a city that rapidly deindustrialized after World War II. When all those troops came back and we shut down all those industries, we shut down big parts of Muskegon. Muskegon lost tens of thousands of people. They had a core downtown that was very nice, but had a lot of vacancies. And it was also very old. And one of the problems that they had is that when people wanted to open, local entrepreneurs or people who wanted to start local businesses would want to go into the downtown, the bar of entry was too high. You have to put money into ADA bathrooms, and you have to put money into a sprinkler system, and you have to, fix up this and that to meet the building code. And these were just too high of burdens for people who, particularly entrepreneurs. What's an entrepreneur at this level? It's a crazy person who doesn't know they can fail. It's someone who has a passion and an idea, but they really don't have a track record or they've really not succeeded to any degree. They're just getting started. And so what Muskegon, Michigan realized is that they were never going to be able to subsidize their way into a booming downtown. They need to lower the bar of entry. So they went out and bought a bunch of these storage sheds. They painted them up funky colors. They placed them strategically on the edge of the downtown in an area where they had a big gap in the streetscape. They did some, good urban form here. And they invited startup entrepreneurs to come in and test out their businesses. I'm going to pause here and just note what's going on here is this is a group of people who want to figure out a way to make a living by doing something of value that other people will value in the community so much that they will pay them for it. We all should want this in our places, right? We all should want this booming level of entrepreneurship. And what has happened is that all of these places are full, right? When we can rent out a place for $75, $80 a month, what we do is we lower the risk for that entrepreneur. We make it so that they can fail and not have that fail result in their bankruptcy, their failure, a decade of decline. They can fail quick, they can fail cheap. And here's the amazing thing. Guess what else is always full? The core downtown. because what has happened is the energy of this place has spilled over into the downtown. And so businesses have moved in, but even more importantly, businesses have graduated from these storage sheds now with proof of concept, with a track record, with a business model that they can confidently go into those downtown places and say, I can take this on now, knowing what I know. When we lower the bar of entry and let more people participate in building a strong town, we see amazing, amazing things happen. Last concept here for getting started is to change the way we do public investments. If you go to our website and read our stuff for any appreciable amount of time, you will see that we are most critical about the big infrastructure investment. I wrote a 5-part series, like 12,000 words, about the administration's jobs plan, and I followed it up with a similar critique on the Republican, framework that they put out. My tweet summary for you today would be: we tried something after World War II. We're done with it. Like whatever gains we were going to get from it, we finished a long time ago. And now we are just pouring more money into legacy programs. We need to stop. And we need to stop in a way where our investments become not top down, but very bottom up. And the question we have to ask really is not, how do we build more stuff? How do we build more interchanges, more highway lanes, more frontage roads? How do we get more subdivisions? We're done building more. We've built more than we can maintain. The question we need to struggle with is, how do we make better use of what we've already built? How do we make better use of that street? How do we make better use of that sidewalk? How do we make better use of that pipe? How do we, in the language of like business, increase our productivity? How do we get more out of our existing systems? This is a community conversation we need to be having in every city across North America. And the way we do it is to shift our process from one of being top down to one of being bottom up, from one where our local government orients around the money that they can get from Washington, D.C., from the state capitol, from Wall Street, and instead orient around the challenges and the struggles that people are experiencing within our communities. These are actually the highest investments that we can make. At Strong Towns, we put together a 4-step process for making the lowest risk, highest returning public investments that we can make. I'm going to walk you through these 4 steps. Step number 1, go out and humbly observe where people in the community struggle. Go out and with humility, observe where people are having a difficult time using the city as it has been built. I'm going to emphasize humility here. The idea is to not go out pretending you know the answer, pretending you know what you're going to see and what you're going to experience, but actually go out with a level of inquiry, of curiosity, to try to experience the community the way people in your place are. Where are people having a difficult time using this city as we have built it? Step number 2, then, ask the question, what is the next smallest thing we can do right now to address that struggle? Not what is the permanent solution, what's the thing we can get the federal grant for or the state loan for, not what is the thing we can go do the big project and fix. What is the thing we can do right now with cones and paint and straw bales to make this struggle that we are witnessing a little bit easier? Step number 3, then, do that thing. Do it right now. Don't form a committee and study it for 6 months. Don't hire a consultant. Don't hold, meeting after meeting. It's a very small, little, tiny intervention. Just go out and do it. And then step number 4 is to repeat this process. Repeat it over and over and over again. If we want our cities to thicken up, if we want them to become better places to live while continuing to grow and increase our level of financial productivity, we have to shift our focus from the next big thing we can do to actually getting more out of those existing investments. The way we do that is by focusing on where people struggle. Where do people have a difficult time? And not responding to that with like overwhelming force, but doing what Jane Jacobs called a co-creation. Jane Jacobs wrote famously that cities are co-creations. They're things we build together. They're not things where we pay our taxes and then someone provides us a service. They're actually things where we participate in our actions in defining what the next version of our place should look like. If we can reorient our systems to focus on where people struggle and respond incrementally to that, what we will find is that we will make very low cost investments that financially have enormous returns, making our places more productive and wealthier over time. We can go this route, and we can continue to go this route. And I think we're going to find ourselves very frustrated and quite frankly, left behind. This is a lot in Oklahoma. I was invited to speak there a few years ago. I enjoyed them. I enjoyed them as people, but I was very sad by this project. Someone in Lawton, Oklahoma had visited somewhere where they had, a nice decorative street lights and a good streetscape. And they said, there's a federal program for building streetscapes. If we had a streetscape like this, we would have similar levels of success. And so they went and they got tens of millions of dollars from the federal government. They had to, of course, match some of that with some local debt. They put in the decorative streetlights, they put in the wide sidewalks, they put in the street trees, and nothing happened. And nothing will ever happen because they started in the wrong spot. They didn't humble themselves to ask the question, where are our people struggling? Where are our neighborhoods lacking success? What is the next incremental thing we can do? Here's an example of what that looks like. Here's a project from Memphis that you guys could all go visit today. Is Broad Avenue. Broad Avenue is a little streetcar stop. In the 1950s, the city ripped out the streetcar. They ran a highway through the middle of this neighborhood, and these two blocks just died. Some people fed up with the decline and neglect went out. They did that next smallest thing. They swept up the buildings, got them kind of cleaned out. They swept up the sidewalks. They used paint and temporarily painted in bike lanes and crosswalks. They decided to hold a little street party. So for a weekend, they invited businesses from around the community to come in and just open up temporarily and kind of demonstrate what the street could look like if someone actually cared. This is not the greatest street in Memphis. It's not like, a wonderful place, but it was better than what was there. And it started to address some of the issues that the people who live in this neighborhood have with the street. Here's the amazing thing. This little intervention turned into something much bigger. As soon as people saw what was possible, things started to happen. The city has gone out and subsequent to this little intervention, noted that there've been 29 now buildings that have been renovated. The rents have gone up because more people want to be in this place. There's a bunch of new businesses that have opened and millions of dollars throughout this neighborhood of new investment that can be directly correlated to this little project. If you go to Broad Avenue today, it's not going to look like it looked before this. It's not going to look like it looks in these photos here. What you see is that the city has actually gone out and done the next increment of intervention. They said, what's the next smallest thing we can do now that we know that this works? And that looks like ripping out this sidewalk and putting in a nice sidewalk. They've made these bike lanes permanent. They've created a separate bike lane, separated bike lane to actually make this even better. And here's the really cool thing about this. They took this incremental approach and they actually moved it a couple blocks down the street in each direction, trying to take the success they've had here and build on it incrementally in other places. You can go drive to this one today and see it and experience what I think is one of the greatest urban interventions in this country, an investment that in terms of the city budget is literally nothing, but has produced enormous levels of return. This is the type of thing we can do, and we can do it at scale over and over again. And our cities can experience tremendous amounts of growth that makes our balance sheet stronger, that makes our city wealthier, that helps us as a community become more prosperous and have greater capacity. And we can do it while simultaneously addressing the most urgent needs in our community, making people's lives better, making people's lives more prosperous, and having us enjoy a much higher quality of life. That is essentially the Strong Towns approach. I want you to know that the original book, Strong Towns, A Bottom-Up Revolution, is available anywhere. They mentioned at the top, Andrea did, that we have the new book came out. It came out last Wednesday, so we're still not even 1 week into having this book out. Confessions of a Recovering Engineer is all about transportation and how the Strong Towns message applies to our transportation systems. You can get these anywhere that books are sold. Thank you so much. If you're interested in Strong Towns and in our message, we publish 2-3 articles a day. They're all common usage, so you can take them and use them for yourself. You can reprint them, you can share them. We're just trying to help people shift their thinking and knowledge about how we create prosperity in our places. So thanks, Andrea.
Fantastic, and thank you so much. Every time I've listened to you present, I leave with something new to think about, and I'm sure that a lot who are listening today feel that way. Do you have time for a couple of questions if anyone has any?
Andrea, I have lots of time for you. I
Great.
have set aside, you tell me when we want to stop, because I love questions and I love having this conversation. So go for it.
Fantastic. All right. If anyone has any questions, if you can type it into the chat, or we could. Todd, I'm not sure if we could just unmute if they want to raise their hand too.
And a couple people have sent me questions, so I'll forward them on to you.
Great.
Okay.
Andrea, how are things in Arkansas right now?
Well, it's a beautiful day, and so that's always good. Things are good.
I in Minnesota, it's like September is the perfect month because we get, and this may seem a little extreme to you, but we get in the 50s at night, which is like gorgeous sleeping weather. And then in the day, it gets up to only like 70s. So it doesn't ever get too hot in the house or anything like that. And it's like the perfect month to be here. The leaves start to turn and it's gorgeous.
End of September, October, it's like that here. But it has been a little cooler. We've been mid 80s, I guess, maybe a little bit warmer on some days, and then into the 60s. Okay, we've got one here. Do you believe race has played a role in the way we as a country have abandoned city centers and other existing built spaces for new communities that didn't exist and are further away from the existing infrastructure?
So, I mean, it's a yes, no question. And I think the answer is yes. I think that, where we go with that is a long conversation. In the first book, Strong Towns, I call race an accelerator. Is definitely an accelerator of the changes that we've experienced. But I like to point out, I think simplifying everything down to just race is, I think, overlooks the huge economic forces that we're dealing with, or that shape this. I mean, my city in Brainerd, Minnesota is 99.9% not just white, but like Nordic white. I mean, I'm Norwegian. My wife comes from a Scandinavian family. That's like what we are. And we have the same development pattern as a place that has a lot of, racial component to it. And so I think there's no doubt that race was an issue in accelerating this. I think when we look at the issue of redlining, we look at the way that decline accelerated in some neighborhoods as an intentional public policy. I think it creates a lot of implications for us today. That being said, I think that we need to address simultaneously, and I think there's a way here we do that. Both the racial injustice elements of our development pattern, as well as this kind of underlying financial insolvency. We have created a development pattern that responds to these macro incentives. It's more responsive to Wall Street than to the needs of our neighbors, and that's not a long-term pattern of success.
All right, we've got several more here.
Yay.
Melissa Rivers is asking, as our communities are considering how to leverage their allocations of American Recovery Plan funds, how do you feel the Strong Towns approach can help them evaluate the best use of these funds? Yeah,
it's a really good question. In fact, the fifth part of the 5-part series I alluded to on the American Jobs Plan answers this question directly. One of the challenges that we have at the local level is that when the money for the stimulus packages start to flow through, it flows through legacy programs. And so you get things like shovel-ready projects and other what we have identified as the kind of the worst of the worst projects are the ones that are most easily funded, and doing things that are innovative and new or incremental, don't rise to the top in these systems. You've got to be big, you've got to be legacy, and it's just the exact opposite approach we want to take. So what we have said to cities is, I think in terms of this money flowing through, your best thing is to try to do no harm. And so we came up with a framework for how we do the least amount of harm, or actually help our cities, use these funds to the best purpose. And you can think of it like this: if you can do maintenance as opposed to building new, if you can do maintenance in old neighborhoods as opposed to new neighborhoods, or neighborhoods that are pre-Great Depression, and if you can do that work underground instead of above ground, the likelihood of you having an investment that is going to help you long-term is much greater. So if you can put the money that you're going to get into maintenance of underground infrastructure in pre-Great Depression historic neighborhoods, what you will be doing is you'll be setting yourself up for success. If you do the opposite, build new stuff in new neighborhoods that is above ground, you're just going to burn through money, create a little sugar high for your community, and then create all kinds of long-term liabilities. So in the absence of any reform from the top, which there is an absence of reform, in the absence of time to actually realign yourself, if you can just follow those three things, you're going to wind up in a better place than places that don't.
Good advice. How do you sell this shift in thinking to developers, or do you just need a whole new crop?
I think the answer is both. So let's start with the second part first. We need a new crop of developers. I think in many ways we do. We like to say a strong town is built by many hands. And if we look back at historical cities, we didn't have large developers. I mean, we occasionally did, but we had a lot of people doing a lot of stuff. And so a bottom-up pattern of development has a lot of local people who are doing building work and development work. There's a group called the Incremental Development Alliance that is out training thousands of local developers to work within these big systems and do actually small incremental projects. I recommend checking them out. But how do we talk to large developers? I think that I think we have to think of it like this. There's a Venn diagram of projects that are good financially for the community and projects that are good financially for a developer. And what our challenge is not to say, well, if it's good for the developer, it must be good for the community. Our challenge is to say, where's that overlap? Where do we find where the developer can make good money and can be very successful and profitable while also adding to the overall balance sheet of the community? We created, if you go to our website, there's a little link at the top for the Action Lab. And in there, we've got some handouts on how cities can evaluate project proposals and go through and basically work with developers to communicate this message that we have to have. I mean, we have to, at the end of the day, run our cities to be solvent enterprises. And this worksheet will allow you, it's called Go or No Go. It will allow you to walk through that process with a developer and help them get on the same page with you and the urgent need of the community to actually do things that are fiscally responsible.
All right, they're still coming in. What are your ideas on how we can create affordable, sustainable housing in the age of climate change and COVID-19? And what are the implications, new construction and adapting heritage buildings, sorry.
Yeah. Well, that's a big question, and it includes a lot of the kind of modern buzzwords. And I understand that that's not a put down, but I think that we can actually simplify it a lot more and just recognize that cities of the past provided affordable housing. I was reading this interesting was it an article? It talked about how there used to basically be in every city houses or places that you could rent overnight. Let me say something that might be a little bit out of bounds. Be generous with me. I'm not trying to say something terrible here. I remember as a kid, there was this for Halloween, there was always like a certain group that would dress up as what we would call hobos. And it was kind of fun. The idea was that you were homeless and walking around with all your belongings in a sack, and you would, this article that I read talked about this as like a thing in the early 1900s, around the Great Depression, but for decades before, this idea of like jumping on the trains and traveling across the country. But it went to great lengths to explain that a lot of these people didn't end up, as we would say, homeless, without a place to sleep at night. What there was, and remember when I talked about the family that needed the leaky roof fixed and their options that they have, if you would walk into a city, there would be a hotel, and a hotel would be for the higher end people. We see the hotel with the big chandelier and all this stuff. The way that the masses would sleep at night would not be at a hotel. It would often be at people's houses. And people would put out a little sign. It would say, room and a meal, $1 or 50 cents or whatever. And you would show up at night and you would say, I'll take the room. And you would go and get a good night's sleep, and you get up in the morning and they'd give you a meal and you'd walk out the door. That's very, very, very common. We've taken all of this like off the table now. You're not allowed to do it. Zoning doesn't allow you to do it. The building code doesn't allow you to do it. Your neighbors won't allow you to do it. I think if we can humble ourselves to go back to that traditional pattern of development, to allow our neighborhoods the capacity to flex and change, what we will wind up with is not like a concentration of poverty or a concentration of people who are homeless like we see today in the camps and the tents and all these things that we're struggling with in this economy. But what you will see is that you'll give society the opportunity to start filling in the gaps, to responding to these demands, and to find where responding to a need in society can be met in a way that makes a family better off and stronger, makes a homeowner, gives them more options and more capacity. I don't think that there's any big program or event that needs to occur to allow us to adapt to the financial challenges or the environmental challenges or the housing challenges. I think we just need to loosen things up at the lower level and allow that incremental adaptation to happen. And I think it will solve, or it will put us on a path to solving a lot of these problems.
All right. And do you have a favorite example of a city ordinance for accessory dwelling units?
Not off the top of my head. Years ago, I wrote a lot of them. Just so we're all on the same page, an accessory dwelling unit would be this idea that I brought up of creating on your single family lot, for example, another place where people could stay, converting your basement or your garage or your attic to a living unit. We regulate that through accessory dwelling unit provisions. To me, the best one is going to be less than a page. It's going to result in really no meaningful net level of regulation within your zoning code. So I think the most successful way to do this is just to say, in whatever zone you're in, you can have an accessory dwelling unit. And that's like a one-line addition, and then be done. Maybe put in a definition of what that is and what you mean, and then be done. Make it by right. Don't put a bunch of permits. Don't put a bunch of, permitting requirements and a bunch of conditions on it. Just let people do it.
All right, and we've got one more, and time for just one more. Mitigation of climate change is expected to require the electrification of everything with renewable resources. The land use for solar panels, wind turbines, storage batteries, and electric transmission lines is expected to be enormous. How does this work up with your ideas of doing things small and repeating them?
That's a really big question. And, with respect for the person who's asking it, I don't necessarily buy into the premise. The premise, let me repeat what I think is the premise here. We are going to solve environmental challenges that face us, whether it's climate or environmental degradation, habitat loss, or what have you. We're going to solve these problems by doing what we do now, but doing it with electric instead of fossil fuel. And assuming that the electric then will all come from non-fossil fuel sources. I don't think the part that I think is very wrong about that is that we will continue to do what we're doing now. I think that if we step back and look at the economics of our cities, we are at the peak in terms of the amount of land we will occupy. We have built more roads than we can maintain. We have built more interchanges and bridges than we can maintain. Even the president's most aggressive plan, and even Congress's most aggressive plan, doesn't come close to even maintaining 15% of the highways that we've built, let alone your cul-de-sac and all that. Our cities are actually going to shrink in size and area. We're going to go through a period of contraction over the coming decades. The best thing that we can do, or the most meaningful thing we can do in terms of climate change, is not to attempt to electrify our current lifestyle, but to actually allow our cities to thicken up, allow neighborhoods to become walkable again, allow us to build corner stores, allow us to create a pattern of living that actually is in itself like an original kind of green. I live a very high quality of life. I walk to work. I walk to the store. I bike a lot. I don't do that because I'm an environmentalist. I do that because I'm cheap and I really like this neighborhood and I really like the quality of life I have here. I think when we can offer that to people, what we'll see is that you'll get the environmental outcomes you want, while people, rapidly shift to something that will provide them a higher standard of living and a higher quality of life. That is what, to me, a successful future looks like. A struggling future looks like one where we try to, pump everything we have into maintaining a development pattern that is financially not sustainable, but just in a way that, in theory would have less environmental impact. I don't see that as being a successful option, even if the environmental side of that was correct, which I'm not sure that it is. Okay. Sorry, I feel like that felt like an apocalyptic and argumentative way to end this call, but I don't. I think it's very hopeful because we have a lot of more options than just, making everyone drive an electric car.
Well, and since you offered, I'm getting messages on my phone and on here to ask one more.
Okay, go for
it. And it is from someone who lives in Canada. Being from Canada, I see similarities in the overall issues. Problem is every town is looking for a way to survive. How do you suggest a sustainable differentiator for each community so that they are not continuously competing for the population growth?
Again, I don't think the population growth is the issue, or the lack of population growth. I mean, think of this. We have created a system for ourselves. Let me acknowledge the question. We have created for a system ourselves that requires continuous growth in order to sustain itself. If your city is not growing, it will fall apart in the current model. That's a broken model. Like, do you want your city to fall apart? It's a little bit like, if I stop growing, I die. No, I've reached, at age 18, I stopped growing, and I've been able to, for the last 30 years, sustain myself and be okay. That's the way natural organic systems work. That's the way traditional cities worked. And that's a system that we want to get to. We wrote I used to have it sitting right here. I can't remember we wrote a report about economic development. You can get it again on the Action Lab. If you go to Action Lab on our website and click on resources, there's a bunch of reports in there. And one of them is on economic development in resource communities, but it really applies to any town the way you're describing it. And it talks about how we can shift our economic development strategy to be one that can withstand long periods of time of no growth or periods of time of stagnation. How we can keep our capital local, have it pass around our community, have it build our community wealth, as opposed to just having our capital come in and then exit immediately. There's a bunch of strategies in there that we can start employing today and start building up to that place where we have greater resiliency, but it won't happen overnight. I think one of the things about putting yourself in a very fragile situation is that your fragility takes away options and alternatives. And so I think the way to look at this properly is not to say, how do we get that full range of options back? But how do we start with the equivalent of a diet of healthy eating and good exercise? How do we put our community on a good, healthy a program, so that over time we build our own capacity and we create our own alternatives and we get those options back. That plan for resource communities will help you with that. And really, that's kind of the essence of what our whole Strong Towns project is trying to do. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you. I know everyone's getting hungry, but this has certainly been thought-provoking and gives people a lot to consider as we're moving forward during this pandemic. And I hope we can get you to Arkansas. So
oh my gosh, that would be a ton of fun. I'm like I said, it's been a little while, and I feel bad about that because we have a lot of people in Arkansas that are plugged into our message. So let's try to make that happen soon.
We'll do that. Last time you were here, I think that our bridge was having to be repaired and we couldn't get across the bridge.
Yeah.
40, but that's going again now. So traffic is flowing much smoother.
Yeah, I know. I actually just found that report. So let me put that in here. It's called Breaking Out of the Resource Trap: An Economic Plan for Resource-Based Communities. That's the economic development one I just talked about. So
perfect. And I hope everyone will check out your website. And I have read your first book. Look forward to reading the second.
Thank you so much.
And we'll let everyone go to lunch now, and we will come back at 2:00.
All right. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, welcome back. I hope everyone had a good lunch and had a little bit of time to get caught up on some work. Retail is such an important part of a community's economic well-being, and effective strategies to maintain a retail presence have been challenged by COVID. For the next 45 minutes, we're going to watch a training produced by Retail Strategies. We're going to watch a training video produced by Retail Strategies, followed by a time of Q&A with Clay Kraft, who's the Vice President of Client Services for Retail Strategies. They've done a lot of really great work from Alabama down to Texas, and I'm looking forward to what we learned today. It's our hope to provide some more focused training in different areas in the future. I know that some cities and towns have brought retail strategies in to do something just for them, and that's something that we can take a look at doing here at the Delta Center. And so as you go through the video, you think of any questions, you go ahead and put them in the chat. If you're like me, you'd forget about them later, go ahead and put them in the chat, and then feel free to reach out to anyone at the Delta Center directly if you have any questions about further training. So Todd, if you're ready, let's go ahead and start the video.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and the opportunity for us to talk about something that we're very passionate about, building communities. We are Retail Strategies and Downtown Strategies. My name is Clay Kraft, and I have Jenn Gregory with me, the president of Downtown Strategies. And today we're going to talk to you about a variety of topics. We're going to go over a program that we developed called Retail as a Catalyst for Economic Development. We're going to give you 10 tips and tricks that you can help retail development in your community. We're going to talk about 4 ways that cities can help their small businesses. And then we're going to end up with creative strategies for backfilling downtown vacancies. I'd like to introduce you to Jenn Gregory.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much, Clay. Glad to be doing this with you this afternoon. Like Clay said, I'm Jenn Gregory. I'm the president of Downtown Strategies, and my role in the company is to implement our downtown suite of services that we have for communities. We really fill a gap that we think exists for communities and downtown practitioners in particular. We aim to support communities to revitalize their downtowns through very implementable strategies and solutions. So we're all about helping communities take those very first steps or just the next steps so that they can start seeing real results in their downtown. Like Clay said, we also have a program to support small businesses. And so my role in the company manages that program as well. And so fortunate to get to work with communities across 19 states throughout our Downtown Strategies platform. My background's in downtown revitalization and community development. And Clay, it's a pleasure to be with you here this afternoon.
Thank you, Jen. And my name is Clay Kraft. I'm Vice President of Client Services for Retail Strategies. I head up the team that works directly with municipalities that hire us to outsource their retail recruitment efforts. So we work directly with our community partners to help fill that deficit in retail that they've identified. So we are a consultant that works directly with the cities. We work in about 40 states at this point. I personally work in the state of Arkansas and across the Midwest. I'm very passionate about what we do. Been with the company about 7 years, and there's not many retailers that we have not recruited to communities. So we're very excited to talk to you today about some of the things that we're doing. So before we get into that, I wanna get a little interaction going with a pop quiz. And this is really just to kind of pull the curtains back on retail, because there's a lot of headlines and there's a lot of disinformation about retail, but I want to really talk about the importance of retail and how vitally crucial it is to really engage retail and actively promote it and bring it into your community. So how many jobs does a typical QSR, and that's short for quick service restaurant, typically bring to a community? Number is 15. So on average, a quick service restaurant brings about 15 full-time equivalent jobs to a community. So if we think about, economic development, you get a couple small wins in your community of just quick service restaurants, you have a significant amount of job creation. So what percentage of jobs in the United States are retail related? 25%. So 25% of all the jobs in the United States are retail and retail related. So retail is a very significant portion of our economy. What percentage of retail is considered small business? 98%. So 98% of all retail is considered small business. So that's businesses that are 50 and under. So small business, vitally important to our retail fabric. So what is the largest consumer demographic? Millennials. We all know and love millennials. Whether or not you have a large portion of millennials in your community or not, millennials have affected, consumer behavior. So retailers have to gear towards, the experience. So, millennials would rather have an experience than have a think. So retailers have to think like that. And as a small business owner, you have to think about that in terms of merchandising and preparing your store to give that consumer that one-off experience that wants them, coming back for more. I bet no one gets this one right. What percentage of retail sales are online? Only 15%. Now online, online is not going, it's not going backwards. It's only going forwards, and online makes up a significant portion of the growth in retail. But still, of all the headlines and all the disinformation, I bet you didn't think that retail was online sales were only 15% of retail. What percent of consumers prefer to shop in store? 78%. So we still prefer to go into those stores, try that shirt on, sit on that couch. Brick and mortar retail is not going away. No matter what you hear, brick and mortar is here to stay. Retailers are just having to be agile and get consumers back in the stores. That's the main problem to solve. So one of the buzzwords you'll hear, and kind of how retailers are fighting back against that, is creating an omni-channeling experience. So omni-channeling is the practice of combining brick and mortar with the online presence. So think about it as that seamless transition between the bricks and the clicks. So having a online presence, and Jim will talk about this in a little bit. That's vitally important. If you're a small business, if you're really anyone that's driving traffic, you need to have that omni-channel presence. So now I want to take you through a program that we developed. It is really, it kind of pulls the curtain behind a little bit about what we do. So, all the things that I'm going to tell you today are all the things that we do behind, within our four walls here. So we partner with communities to do this, but you know what, if you want to take it on your own, these are some of the best ways that if I could guide you, this is how we would recommend doing it. So the 5 topics we're going to talk about today are the 5 benefits of retail development. We're going to talk about the 5 steps to organize for retail recruitment. We're going to talk about the 5 keys for successful retail recruitment, the 5 toolbox essentials, and the 5 elements for successful implementation. So what are the 5 benefits for retail development? You want to increase the quality of life. You want to create that sense of place. You want to bring in sales tax and property tax revenue. You want to grow your economy. And retail is an economic catalyst. So retail enhances quality of life. If you want to start a fuss on a city's Facebook page, you ask, what retail do you want to see? And I guarantee you'll get 400 or 500 comments. So everyone is passionate about retail. So it truly does enhance the quality of life. It creates jobs, it creates tax revenue. One of the things we'll talk about here is retail strengthens the placemaking, especially in a downtown. I mean, small business retail, it truly creates a sense of place. Those small downtowns that have those great small businesses, it really ties the fabric of the community together. In addition, it creates those pedestrian friendly green spaces. It just creates a good atmosphere. Walking down a main street that has bustling small businesses versus one that's vacant and empty is 2 very, very stark experiences. And retail pays you back. Retail recruitment is one of the few things that you can do that actually invest in your community. So bringing in retailers, increasing that property tax, increasing the sales tax. You create fees through business licensing. So, we like to think about, any dollar you spend towards retail recruitment or helping prop up your small businesses is really an investment in your community. And retail grows the economy. Retail, we talked about the job creation for just a small quick service restaurant. But in addition to that, it supports other jobs. One of the things we'll talk about here is, driving economic development. Many cities for a long time have taken the approach that, hey, you know what, we'll wait for the housing to pop up. We'll then get we'll get the industry, and then the retail will follow along. But I'm here to tell you, and it's not anecdotal because I've seen it live and in color. Site selectors for industry will pass over a community that does not have the retail base, because they know, if they're going to set up shop and bring 300 jobs to your town, and they don't have the, if they don't have the retail that, that even just the spouses need to support the family, it's vitally important. So, we want to think about, the title is retail as a catalyst for economic development. Truly is. It is a 3-leg stool. You want to focus on the housing, you want to focus on the industry, but you have to recruit retail, because I can guarantee you your competing communities are already doing so. So the next one I want to talk about, once we identify the importance of retail and why we need to actively recruit it, let's talk about some steps that we need to do to organize. So first, we want to create our team. Once we have our team together, we have to have a vision. We all want to be on the same page. We have to take surveys of not only your community members, but also those teams, come up with the funding, and then create a plan. So assembling the team, vitally important. Whether you work with a consultant like Retail Strategies or Downtown Strategies, or you partner with your economic development agency, or it's a joint venture between economic development or the chamber, or maybe it's a nonprofit, you have to have a group together that is solely focused, because I'm here to tell you, retail recruitment is a relationship business, and it takes a tremendous amount of time. So you have to have a team that is focused and dedicated to the cause. So vision, one of the main things you have to think about when you're first starting in this is, what do we want to accomplish? And we have to be on the same page. So everybody has to be singing off the same page of music. And we'll talk about how we develop that vision, but just here to tell you that it is important. So surveying your stakeholders. Not only is this coming up with what community leaders and officials want, engage your community, ask them what they want and need. Now, you're going to get some crazy answers and just some retailers that make absolutely no sense. But we'll talk about how we kind of weed through that. But it is important to engage your community about what they want to see, and then use the hard data facts, whether that's through retail leakage or just looking at peer communities, to come up with your plan. And then funding. We talked about retail recruitment as an investment, pays you back, but in the front end, you're going to have to spend some money. So you're going to have to pay either staff, you're going to have to pay a consultant, but you need to come up with the front end before you start this of how you're going to source it. So is it entities that are going to benefit from the sales tax and property tax, whether that be, hotel tax or restaurant tax. So it's just really important to come up with that funding before you get started. And then we want to start to develop our plans. We want to take a look at our zoning, our land use. What resources do we have? Do we have great infrastructure? Do we have natural features that we can kind of use to build around as a catalyst? And also, housing is vitally important. You can have, you talked about the three legs of the stool, industrial, retail, and housing. You need all three. So, not asking you to tackle all three at once, but it is important to think about what your community can support with every incremental step of retail you bring in. So now we've assembled a team. Let's talk about the 5 keys to success. And those 5 are focus, inventory, players, challenges, and the action plan. So focus. So in the beginning, after you've assembled that team, you need to start, taking inventory. So really, when we partner with the community, the first 3 months really is us, running all the demographics, getting to know the players in the market. And you have the advantage if you already know your community really well, but you need to learn it through the eyes of a retailer. So, creating those maps, those trade area reports, and we'll talk about those in a little bit of detail, but you've got to accumulate a lot of information in the front end so you can then regurgitate that back to the retail community. The next is inventory. And this is one step that gets overlooked very often. But you need to start with an inventory of your available properties, because you can want a Target, a Costco, a Chick-fil-A, whatever it is that your community wants and needs. But if you don't have the real estate, you're not going to get that deal done. So, in a retailer, we work with communities that retailers have tried to open up there for 5 years, and the real estate just doesn't exist, and there's not much you can do about it. But if you identify what you have and come up with a plan to bridge that deficit, you got a really good start. And that's not just taking inventory of properties that are available now. You want to be looking at higher and better use. What are properties that we could potentially, purchase as a municipalities to use that as an incentive. So you want to take a holistic approach to inventorying your real estate assets. The next, and I can't really overemphasize, how important this is getting to know the players. So, whether you're a large community or a small community where, you might not have commercial brokers in your community, you might have residential brokers that handle the commercial aspect from time to time, get to know those people, find out what their challenges are. If they're talking to retailers, I promise you they're getting feedback from those retailers. It might not be, flowing to you, but if you can get some of that information on the front end, it can help you as you're developing your plan. Also reach out to, if you're 25 miles outside of a major metropolitan, get to know brokers and developers in those markets too, because I can assure you the players that are in the major metros, they're going to transact in your market, whether they're tenant reps or developers. So get to know those people, and try to add value. So next, we want to identify the challenges. So, the issues that small towns face are not much different than the issues that large towns face. They're totally different types of problems, but there's still problems. So whether, if I'm a big city that has tons of retail and I want additional, and maybe I don't have any land, there's not property, so that's the same issue of having a small town with, maybe I don't have the demographics. So there's ways that you can rise above each one, but really you need to identify what are the main challenges that you face as a community. And then we want to create our action plan. So we want to give those players, specific tasks, Whether that's, one person identifies all the inventory, one person comes up with a prospect list of what retailers are in our surrounding areas that are not in our market. And then we want to create measurable success. So, one small trade secret is, this is a long game. Retail recruitment is just the same as, recruiting industry. It is a marathon, not a sprint. It does not happen overnight. Even if I'm Chick-fil-A and I decide I want to open up in your market, it's going to be 12 months before you see any measurable success and that retailer is open. So just be prepared for a long game. And retailers, developers, and brokers, they're very busy. They have lots of inbounds. Don't take offense if you don't get a response from your first outreach effort. It's, persistence is what's gonna help you succeed. So after we've tackled that, let's talk about the 5 toolbox essentials that you're going to need. So we need to learn how to identify our trade area. We need to understand our demographics for better or for worse. We need to do a market analysis. We come up with that prospect list that I talked about, and then incentives. So trade area. So a lot of municipalities that I work with and interface with, they think about their city as really just the city boundaries. Well, my population is 15,000. Well, that's great, but retailers, they don't care about city boundaries. It doesn't exist to them. That imaginary line that's drawn on the paper, it might as well not even be there. When a retailer is looking at your market, they're going to have really their predetermined, we need to see X within 3 miles or 10 miles or 15-minute drive time. What we preach and what we practice at Retail Strategies on the recruitment services, we want to define the custom trade area. So we want to determine, where's the largest percentage of our consumers coming on a day-to-day basis into your market. One of the ways that we do this is through our data provider, allows us to run mobile data tracking. So we can actually see, the custom trade area for a specific retail location that updates every single night. That software is very expensive, and that's one of the benefits to working with us. But if you don't have access to that, you need to determine whether that's looking at license plates in the parking lot or getting credit card information. You need to really understand where your consumers are coming from, because that is the story that you're going to want to tell to the retailers. So once we understand the trade area, we need to understand the demographics of that trade area. So, there's, I would say as far as demographics go, the daytime population, vitally important for restaurants. You want to know the median household income. Most retailers go off median and not average. You want to understand your growth rate, and dig into the psychographics of your market to really understand consumer behavior, so you can make sure you're catering your pitch to retailers that actually make sense for your market. And then, so once we've determined all that, we kind of want to take a deep dive of market analysis. Some of the pillars of market analysis is leakage or gap report. So, you might want one thing, you might think you need another thing, but sometimes the gap does not tell the full story. But sometimes we can really understand and pull out some nuances where specific categories we need to focus on based on the leakage. So, you combine that trade area analysis with the retail inventory, and this kind of starts to paint a picture of, okay, I've got a huge deficit of, I think I hear often the time, I don't want any more quick service restaurants. I don't want any more quick service restaurants. We only want sit down casual restaurants. Well, those from a national perspective anyway, those brands really aren't expanding very much. But you might see from the gap analysis that you have a large deficit in quick service restaurant, which, the market knows that, they have gaps to fill. You need to fill those before you can really get that next rung up. And here's a profile, a market example profile that we put together. Some of the things I'll highlight here is, retailers, they want to, they don't want to pioneer a side of the market. So if you have an established retail corridor and you're trying to say, well, we don't want to increase the traffic over here, and we want to start the retail on the other end of town, without a big catalyst project, you really just need to not reinvent the wheel and focus where the retail exists. And that's primarily going to be along your highest traffic corridors. So you can see here we've highlighted the vehicles per day along the corridors, because that's really where the retailers want to flow to the path of least resistance and get where they can get within the highest percentage of the consumers. So then the fun one is the retail target. So retail targets, this is going to consist of your prospect list. So I would encourage you in the front end, now that we've done this homework, we're starting to get to know our community through the eyes of a retailer. Let's then come up with our prospect list, and we want to make this realistic. Because a lot of these tenant rep brokers, they might represent Target, but they also might represent McDonald's or Burger King. So, you don't want to burn out a contact. You don't want to get your email blocked from one of these tenant rep brokers. So it's very important to understand what your community can support. And I'll just tell you one quick and easy way to do that. Look at surrounding communities that your community strives to be, see what retailers are in those communities, and make a list. Make a list of retailers that are in that community that are not in yours. And that can be the very basic bones of your retail prospect list. And then incentives. I won't go too far into incentives other than just, I'm here to preach that incentives are vitally important. And the main reason for that is because if you look at, obviously hypersensitive to now, inflation, especially in construction, has gone through the roof. But, over the last 20, 25 years, the cost of goods and services to build these locations has gone up by a huge margin, whereas the rents that retailers will pay has really not even come close to keeping pace. It's honestly almost stayed flat. So, how does a developer build a building, the same building, same square footage in 2021 that they built in 1970, and the retailer's paying the same rent? So you do the math there. There's going to be a delta, but we talk about incentives. If an incentive pays a developer back in 5 years, and then you recoup the property tax and sales tax for as long as that retailer's ringing cash registers, that is an investment and a wise investment to make in your community. So now that we've got all the groundwork laid, let's talk about the 5 elements for successful implementation. And this is really where the rubber hits the road. So the fundamentals, blocking and tackling, talked about not wanting to burn out those contacts. Before you make outreach to a retailer, really understand what they need. If it is let's just say Harbor Freight typically does not like to do new construction. They're looking to backfill, vacancies in that 10 to 20,000, but typically 15,000 square feet. So sending Harbor Freight, for instance, a 2-acre, pad site, it's probably not the best use of your time, and it's going to kind of burn you out with that retailer. So really understand what the retailer needs. And there's resources that you can subscribe to and pay for that will give you the contact information for retailers. It'll tell you what their site selection criteria is. So really understand that before you make the outreach, because you want to, the biggest way to get in the good graces of retail and get some feedback and something going is to actually provide value to that retailer. So communicating, creating your marketing materials, create a local stakeholder and broker list. As you're, if you're proactively making this outreach to retailers, filter that back to brokers. If you have local brokers in your community, share that information with them, because, brokers are they're focused on their deals they have now. So if they don't have a site that fits, X retailer, but that retailer has interest in your market, share that information with them. The more people that have a knowledge, and I say that with let me retrace my steps there. One thing you have to make very hyper aware of is, as you're recruiting retail and you have a retail interest, don't share that in a public forum. Make sure this is a trusted stakeholder group that will keep the information confidential until that retail deal is done, because retailers don't like to have their news being front run, because it can, think for a variety of reasons. It could increase the cost of the deal and cost of the land. So we want to make sure to avoid that. So then mobilize your team, give everyone specific tasks, share that information with the brokers, engage your property owners, let them know that you're taking this proactive outreach, that you're going to be, sending their site, but just make sure that you delegate items to everybody on your team that you create in the front end. And then connect. I mentioned that this is a relationship business and it's a long game. Build that network. If you go to a trade show and someone takes a meeting with you, send them a thank you card. It's a small thing you can do that people will remember and will go a long way. Joining industry organizations, ICSC, they've recently rebranded, and I can't think of the name now, but it used to be the International Council of Shopping Centers. join that organization. It'll give you good contact information with retailers, and just give you a kind of a leg up, so you'll be plugged into the industry. And then wash, rinse, and repeat. Even as a professional that does this day to day, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that every single retailer answers my call on the first ring or answers that first email. Sometimes it's 5, 6, or 7 emails. And then just be like, hey, Clay, sorry, you hit me at a bad time. And the third and fourth times were also bad times. I'm just swamped. But thank you for sending this to me. We'll get back to it. And, a lot of times I've had those where just persistence, was really the key to getting a deal done. Because some people just give up and send an email and say, well, ho hum, I didn't get a response. I'll move on to the next one. You burn through your prospect list. And it's like, well, nobody likes me. No one wants to answer my phone calls or emails. And you just kind of give up. If you do that, I promise you, you're not going to have success. So that is the 5 pillars of our retail as a catalyst for economic development. Now I want to take you through, a personal list of just, my 7 years of experience in the industry, of just my top 10 tips and tricks, to really give you that extra leg up when you're recruiting retail. So many times a city, when they're talking about themselves, because, let's just say you're a city manager, you're very passionate, everything that's going on in your community, maybe one of the first things you talk about is, we just got this amazing splash pad, just opened up, our community's in love with it. It's a big draw, which that is awesome. Commend you on that effort, but don't tell that to retailers, because it doesn't matter. They don't care. It's just a waste of their time. So let's come up with a 30-second elevator pitch in person, or just a 2 or 3 sentence elevator pitch to quickly convey what are the high points of your market and what is the specific real estate site that I'm sending you. So just be very concise. If you send a retailer a 4 or 5 paragraph email, I can promise you, you're not going to get a response. 2 would be, coming up with a SWOT analysis for your market. Really understand your weaknesses and deficiencies. But I'm very convicted to say, sell your strengths. Don't, fix your weaknesses, but really, if you have something that's very strong, sell your strengths and hyper focus on your strengths, because your strength might be something that your neighboring community can't offer, whereas the weakness is something that everybody has. So really understand your weaknesses, work to identify and correct those, but really understand your strengths and sell those. Target the right retailer. I kind of talked about this earlier, but I'll hit on it again. Look at those communities that you aspire to be and target those retailers. So, come up with a realistic list of prospects, but don't shoot too far. We want to be realistic, because that's how you're going to have measured success with retail recruitment. One thing that, I might be a little ticky-tacky, and you might be looking around in the room, and you got some of your neighboring communities, but all is fair in love and war. Reach out to retailers in surrounding markets for relocation opportunities. A lot of times that, retailer might be doing good business, but landlords, jacking their rent rates up, or maybe the market's kind of out, the market's grown away from them. And that retailer wants to stay in the trade area, but maybe your market can serve the same trade area by relocating into your market. So don't be afraid to reach out to those retailers. It might not even be a relocation opportunity. You might just be reaching out to those local operators to see if they want to come to your market. Another one that I like to promote as an incentive is, if you have the opportunity and ability, a big caveat there, not every city does, but if you do have the opportunity and ability to land bank good property, but that has retail potential, down the road that can pay dividends. So let's just say, statutorily, you don't have a lot of tools in your belt for incentives. If you could offer a developer, free land with the contingency that they develop and produce, et cetera, that can give you a huge leg up on a surrounding market. So think about that, as you have that, maybe that downtown vacancy, that downtown building that nobody wants to touch, but you can see it as you have the vision and foresight that no one else does to land bank that as a good property in your downtown that could, serve to really spark your downtown. Really consider that. The next one is going to be, cut the red tape. If you can, develop an A to Z, plan for, don't cut the red tape when it comes to permitting, zoning, make the entitlements, make them clear, I'm not necessarily make them easy, but make them clear that everyone that transacts in your markets, they know the A to Z steps. Don't make it difficult for a retailer to open in your market, because I can promise you, the retail world is a very small knit community. If you get a reputation for being difficult to open a store in, that reputation will get around. Excuse me. And then promote value add opportunities in your market. We are overstored by a huge degree in the United States. We're over retailed by the next country 10-1, just because there was a race to build as much as we could. So when you're taking that inventory, look at those higher and better use opportunities. You don't have to think about retail as always ground up. Backfill is a big a big heavy point of emphasis for a lot of retailers. A lot of retailers that weren't doing backfill opportunities are now doing those. So really take that into account, and then focus on sustainable retail mix of uses. Retail development going forward is going to be a mix of those service-based, residential. So really think about a good mix of retail, and then target franchisees. If you can't get to the decision maker, if you can't get to the real estate director or tenant rep broker, go directly after the franchisees, and that's calling the specific locations. And then focus on quality of life. Now, we talked about quality of life in the beginning, but really it's something you want to drive home, and that's about serving your community and finding out what they want and need. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jenn to talk about the 4 ways cities can help their small businesses.
Well, thank you, Clay. And it's a great segue because, as you mentioned, quality of life, one of the great ways to boost the quality of life is with your small business ecosystem and creating that sense of place that Clay mentioned earlier, in retail as a catalyst. And of course, many times this happens in your downtowns, but it could be in any town center location or simply just on a commercial corridor. So 4 ways that cities can help small businesses. All right, so what we know is that small businesses were affected pretty mightily by COVID. Many communities have said, well, our sales tax revenue has grown, and so our businesses are doing just fine. But when we dig into that, we realize that a lot of that growth was on online shopping, and our small businesses are the ones that really were affected. In many communities and in Arkansas as a whole, we know that small business revenue declined by about 30% since pre-COVID times. And so it's really important that cities be there for those businesses. Now, many of you have offered financial support, loans, grants through federal funding, and that's certainly one way to do it. But we also have a couple of other tips that we're going to present to you. And so the first is training and technical assistance. You've given the financial resources, you've helped those businesses pay their rent, but now what they really need more than anything is to modernize. What we learned also through COVID is that over 60% of small businesses at the time that COVID hit did not have an online presence. So when we saw these mandatory closures and restrictions, businesses had no ability to connect with their consumers. So technical assistance and training is a key thing that municipalities, economic development agencies, and chambers can offer their small businesses. And at Retail Strategies, we're actually providing that technical assistance. And what we mean here is training, coaching, consulting, hand-holding to help these businesses get online, to help them modernize their points of sale systems, get ready for the holidays, help their restaurants really recover and pivot. So this is taking that financial assistance and really going to the 2.0 phase of helping them be better. The next is to plan an ecosystem. And really what we mean by this is your downtown or your town center. This is where small businesses live. And so now is the perfect time. There's really never been a better time for cities to prioritize the revitalization of the built environment where these small businesses live. Revitalization plans, strategic plans is really where you begin with that. Downtown revitalization can include thousands of different things, and everyone has a great idea about a pocket park here or a facade program here, a concert, an event. You really need to start with a plan of how you can lift up that small business ecosystem, that downtown, bring more people, residents and visitors to your downtown, which in turn directly supports your small businesses. Next, we have facilitate funds. We know that, as we mentioned, you guys have given a lot of funds, but there's still a lot of money floating around. Through federal stimulus programs, through the American Rescue Plan, even some leftover dollars within the Small Business Administration, there's a lot of money out there on the state and federal level, and maybe even with localities that can directly support these small businesses. So our recommendation here is to really be that connector. We can help you with that here at Retail Strategies. It is a lot to understand and digest, and we've spent the better part of the last 18 to 24 months digging in to understand those resources and opportunities. But our message here is that the city doesn't have to be the one handing out all the checks. Simply be a facilitator of these funds and help your small businesses get connected. And then lastly, be flexible. This is something that a lot of cities have gotten to be really good at through COVID, and we're really proud and excited about that. We know it's hard, but what we mean here is to not be so rigid with all of the rules, permitting procedures as it relates to the outdoor spaces in your downtown. You know, we know that there was a kind of a push down of COVID, thank goodness, but we're seeing it rise back up. We don't know that it's going to be gone for forever. So if, you know, God forbid, we have to go back into a situation where there are closures or restrictions or mandates, cities need to be flexible. We want to see you reimagine the public spaces in your downtowns, create opportunities for outdoor dining. Can you sacrifice 4 parking places and build a street deck so that your restaurants can put tables out there and have the ability to serve more customers? Be flexible with outdoor shopping, sidewalk sales, tent sales, really support these small businesses in this time of need. And again, want to just mention that, you know, we do have the ability to help you through all of this. We do have some services, but more importantly, we want to be a resource for you and to help you continue that conversation of supporting those businesses. Now let's talk a little bit further about your downtown. You know, because of COVID, we have seen vacancies increase, unfortunately. Some businesses just determined, you know what, now it's time for me to retire, and I'm just going to close up shop and do something else. But we've also seen some businesses fail. So now we're going to talk about how you as a city leader can work with property owners to creatively fill some of those vacancies you may be experiencing in your community. We've got 6 steps, and you know, really, they're all a little bit different. We won't go into too much detail, but think about how you can implement even 1 or 2 of these in your city. You know, one thing that we really want to talk about here is that ultimately, of course, you all want to find a tenant to fill all of these spaces, a long-term tenant. That's the ultimate goal. But until then, we're going to talk about some short-term strategies that can help your property owners receive some revenue and help activate some of these vacancies in your community. So the first is short-term leases. You know, a lot of property owners are hesitant to even talk about this, but we'd like to see you pitch the idea to them. And so what we mean here is the summer is gone, and we're now in the fall season leading up to the holidays. Perhaps you could work with your property owners collectively to activate vacant space for a short-term holiday season lease program. So maybe you can recruit home-based businesses or vendors and artisans from your farmers market that are not quite ready to open that brick and mortar store, but want to test the market. Essentially, this is a pop-up. We'll talk more about pop-ups in just a moment, but basically encouraging those property owners to execute a 3-month lease for the holidays. Hopefully that will turn into a more permanent lease, but really getting them to think about the possibilities. So we mentioned pop-ups, and pop-ups are an excellent way to activate space in your downtown. Many of you have heard about these, and we've seen creative pop-ups anywhere from, a storage shed that can kind of be repurposed to look like a fun retail venture. We've seen Airstreams and campers and containers, shipping containers, be filled for a short-term period with, as you see in this picture, a flower shop, really, in a snow cone vendor, anything that are going to get people out on the sidewalks. But in addition to thinking about what types of creative containers you can bring to your downtown, let's think about those vacancies as opportunities for pop-ups. Maybe you have a fall festival and you need event space. You need to pop up an art gallery. The holiday seasons, you might have corporations that are always looking for space. So next recommendation is to think about that vacant space for events, galleries, holiday parties. What this does is it shows the pedestrians and the people in your community that something's happening here. Downtown's not dead. The next recommendation we have is a really big one, and we have worked with several communities in Arkansas on this very thing. A lot of you have large vacancies. Maybe it was an old department store, maybe it was an old bank, and you're sitting there with 5,000 square feet of ground floor space that's vacant. Like Clay said earlier, retailers are right sizing. Even local entrepreneurs don't need that much space anymore. As we talk about omni-channeling and getting these businesses online, they need less of a brick and mortar space. So the recommendation here is to work with your property owners, and policy comes into this in a big part. Perhaps that 3,000 square foot property can be broken up into 3 1,000 square feet spaces. But what the property owner is going to say is, well, the city is going to make me put 3 ADA compliant bathrooms, and I can't afford that. So can you work with that property owner to build a foyer space in the back where all 3 spaces can share that one ADA restroom space? Again, thinking creatively. And then the next recommendation here is to reimagine the design of that vacant space. Can it be for a different use? Clay has talked a lot about higher and better use, and this is something that we're big fans of. Can that old bank now be a mixed use facility with a restaurant on the bottom and a couple of condos up top? Can we build in or build out some space to have an outdoor patio now that serves the community a little bit better? So reimagining the footprint, reimagining the use is the recommendation here. Next is something that can be a little difficult to talk about, but we want to pitch it to you nonetheless, and that's a vacancy tax or assessment. This is something that we talk with our downtown communities with a lot. It has to be right for your community, but every time we go to visit a downtown, the number one thing that our city team says is, I just wish I could get this property owner to sell. He or she doesn't want to do anything with the property, or they can't afford to. It's not tenantable, so it's just sitting there. So the recommendation here is that we know that there is a negative economic impact of vacancy on the community and on the fellow business owners. Communities are now looking at taxing those property owners that essentially refuse to lease or sell their space. You have the ability to do that, and we can work with you to kind of consider that if you're interested. Clay, I'll toss it back over to you.
Yeah, Jen, thank you so much. Appreciate the insights you shared, and just want to thank you all again today for joining us. Hopefully with all that information, you picked up a morsel or two that you can take back and implement within your community to whether bolster your national retail corridor or spruce up your downtown. And just want to say it again, thank you for your time today and really allowing us to share our knowledge with you. I want to remind that, Retail Strategies, think about us as your community development partner. We have our recruitment services that focuses on that national corridor. Jen heads up our downtown strategy that's really focusing on revitalizing your downtown and then providing that small business technical support to your small business. And we also have a retail academy that focuses on education. So, teaching, communities and taking more of a deep dive from what we showed today to really help you dig in. So, if anyone has interest in that, we would absolutely love to have the opportunity to talk with you about, what's going on in your community, what are you facing, and maybe how we can help you out. So with that, I appreciate your time.
Okay, that was great. I know I picked up more than just a few morsels, and I'm already seeing some questions come in. Clay Craft has now joined us. I think he left everyone a message in the chat, but he's the face of retail strategies, and he's here for some Q&A. Just a little background on him. He's been a trusted real estate advisor to more than 90 cities and 9 states, successfully recruiting countless national and regional retailers to the market. He has created a strong network of relationships in the Southeast and in the lower Midwest with retailers and developers, and he is a respected voice throughout the regions. So Clay, if you're here, are you ready to start with the question?
I am. Good afternoon,
first?
everyone.
Great, thank you. Okay, question 1, can you speak to the importance of a holistic approach when assessing a targeted approach to retail recruitment? Example, proximity to commercial centers. Another example, a gap analysis may show leakage of a certain category like affordable furniture and household goods, but a big box store 1 hour away will likely continue to draw consumers. Data is important, but anecdotal evidence is also important. It is usually not an issue if the community has a trained development person, but many towns do not. That was a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start with the first one. In regards to a holistic approach, I mean, absolutely, that's, we definitely take a bottom up approach. We want to be looking at a market through every angle. As a city leader, really nobody can tell your story the way that you can. So you have the power to really get that custom and creative narrative that's happening in your market out to the retail world. Now, where we come in and where the ability that we bring is we can get directly to the retailer. So that's, as a city leader, that's probably one of the most difficult things you're gonna face, is just getting in touch with these decision makers at retailers. And really, it's about developing a personal network. A lot of these, I mentioned in the video that, a lot of these tenant rep brokers are going to be commercial real estate agents that are in your neighboring metro areas. So, within probably an hour to an hour and a half drive, if you have a metro location in that proximity, there's going to be commercial real estate agents that are going to be employed by the retailers to do that site selection. So get to know them, and really, that's how you're going to make the quickest impact. But yeah, absolutely, from a holistic approach, it's not just about demographics. It's not about psychographics. It's taking bits and pieces from every bit of that puzzle and putting that puzzle together in the right way that those decision makers need to hear it and need to receive it. So that's the leg up that you have on anybody else that's recruiting retail for your community.
Okay, great.
What was the refresh me on the second question? I think it was demographic question.
I don't know. I think it was just all examples. I don't know that there's a second one in there.
Okay.
The next one is, are there several communities who have pursued vacancy taxes? Any we could learn from?
Yes, absolutely. So unfortunately, Jenn Gregory she's actually hosting a downtown strategies charrette today in Kentucky and wasn't able to join us. But yes, I've had this question from many communities that we work with, because the idea of a vacancy tax is controversial, and we will gladly admit that. But the situation that a lot of city leaders face is, you've got a great downtown that's got great bones, you got vibrant businesses, but you have maybe out of town or in town property owners that, they're not lifting a finger to address the vacancies in their, in their shopping center, in their building. So, as a city leader, what do? You're committed to making your downtown vibrant and beautiful and walkable. And you have these owners that you can't do anything. So the vacancy tax is one way to, and again, controversial, is one way to kind of help circumvent that. And I'll tell you, just from talking to Jenn, because she's the one that really is the expert on this. A lot of cities have even mentioned a vacancy rate tax, and even something as small as $500 a month. Has really motivated property owners to get off their heels and get to doing something. So I don't know how often it gets implemented, but I do know, anecdotally, just from the idea of having that potentially coming down the pike has led to some property owners getting motivated to do something.
Interesting. Okay, and the questions are still coming in. So
Good.
due to the emerging presence of businesses like DoorDash and Grubhub, for small businesses looking to deliver, should you start with your own delivery system or merge with DoorDash or Grubhub? What's the better step for a small business?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I think as a small business owner is probably difficult to really answer right now. I'm not necessarily an expert in those delivery services, but as I understand it, they do charge high margins, so it's expensive for the restaurant to work with DoorDash. I do think they take a cut off the top. The biggest issue that every small business faces, and it's small town, major metros, whatever, is just getting employees. So getting the appropriate amount of staff to have your business open its normal hours and its normal days of the week. I know where I live here in Birmingham, a lot of the restaurants are having to close on certain days of the week that they would normally operate. So yeah, I think if I'm a business owner and I'm looking to hire additional employees right now, such as a delivery driver, I think that's probably the best path. And I think we're going to continue to see disruption in the restaurant space. COVID has really pushed the delivery and narrative forward. It's taken it 5 to 6 years in the future. The same thing with grocery. So I really think, I think the future of restaurant, the future of grocery, you see Amazon doing it right now. Amazon's testing out a grocery format that they are, it's not going to be a grocery store. If everybody's familiar with the term ghost kitchen. So if you're not, so think about a ghost kitchen is just simply, it's either a shared cooking space or a shared kitchen space. But a lot of restaurants are going to a model that's just a kitchen. So that restaurant serves to just make the food, and they rely 100% on delivery. Well, Amazon's now doing this with the grocery store. So they're testing out grocery stores in urban markets where it's set up like a warehouse. So the goods and groceries are set up like a warehouse. So they have, the order comes in, they have a robot that picks the order. So within 10 or 15 minutes of that order coming in, that robot can pick the order that shipped, or Instacart shopper can come get it. So I think if you're not doing delivery, you need to do it because you're missing out on a huge market right now. But I think we're early days of what this delivery is really going to turn into. Just overarching theme is technology is completely disrupting every industry, no matter what it is. So definitely embrace that technology as best you can and really, adapt with the times, which is easier said than done. Understand when businesses are fighting to stay open right now, but there will be light at the end of the tunnel. We're all gonna get there.
Well, we sure hope so. And so I don't have any more questions in the chat, but if anyone would like to just raise your little hand, or you can certainly put it in the chat, but we can unmute you and ask a question or just have a discussion that way. Wow, we've got Clay with us. And hopefully he'll be back. in Arkansas, and I was talking earlier about how we were going to try to do some more focused training at a later date too. Okay, so one came up in the chat. Jen mentioned pop-ups. However, it seems that not all pop-ups are made equal. For instance, a restaurant pop-up may achieve more notoriety compared to a carpentry pop-up. How do you make sure that your pop-up stands out?
That's a great question, and probably one that honestly I would need to get Jen's advice and circle back. I would say I think pop-up retail, especially let's just say from the eyes of a if I'm a community leader, and I'm going to kind of turn this question a little bit. If I'm a community leader and I'm looking for ways to showcase my business owners and showcase my downtown, we have been consulting with a couple cities that have said, hey, we've got these vacancies downtown, we've got a little bit of money to do something with it, we don't know what the biggest impact. We're kind of kicking the idea around of shared workspace, but also pop-up retail. So I think if the city, imagine if your city had a downtown space that was that could host pop-up retail. So you get a conglomerate of pop-up. So it's not just the restaurant, it's not just the carpentry, it's really a display of pop-up retail. And we're starting to see that pop-up retail, from getting these small business owners that have crafts or goods and things like that. Pop-up retail road shows are starting to become a thing now. So outside of getting your business on a having that omni-channeling presence, so that's that seamless integration between bricks and clicks. You gotta have the online presence, whether that's something as simple as a Facebook page or Instagram. You gotta have some way for locals, but mainly, if a tourist comes to your market, if they need to buy goods and services, the first thing they're going to do, they're going to hop on their phone, they're going to Google search. And if you don't come up on that Google search, you're probably not going to get a hit from that out-of-town visitor unless they just happen to stumble in. So I know I kind of walked all around that question because I'm not an expert in that field. Just kind of speaking on some experience that I've been exposed to.
That was good, and I have their information if anyone would like to follow up more in detail.
Yeah.
So Dawn is asking if there's a template or example of vacancy taxation that Jen mentioned.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. I will ask Jen if she's got a template or some boilerplate talking points that we can share, and I will get those to you, and you can send those out to the group.
We will get that out.
Yeah.
And she says thank you. So
of course,
another question that came directly to me was to ask if you could comment about putting retail in opportunity zones.
Yeah, it's certainly I think opportunity zones were they on paper they probably sounded better than what they ultimately ended up being. I think the current administration is rolling back the opportunity zones, as well as potentially rolling back the 1031 exchange that will completely cripple the commercial real estate industry. But that's a soapbox I'm not going to stand on right now. But yeah, I mean, opportunity zones, are opportunity zones for a reason. I'll give you two examples. If your entire city is in an opportunity zone, that's a little bit different than having a specific opportunity zone in your market. Most likely, if you have a section of your market that it is an opportunity zone, most likely retail is not going to want to be there. If your entire market is within an opportunity zone, it's a little bit better of an incentive, just because the retailer doesn't pick or choose. But what we found with communities that we worked with that have these pockets of opportunity zones, typically they are not in areas where at least national retailers want to locate.
What do you think retail will look like in 20 years?
Oh, wow. I let me pull out my crystal ball. 20 years ago, if you think about, the biggest market leaders and disruptors, I mean, gosh, 20 years ago, some of your bigger retailers were Kmart, Sears, Radio Shack, all these businesses that are no longer in business. They're really just real estate holding companies, because the only asset that they have left is their real estate, frankly. We're going to continue to see, I think in 20 years from now, I think we're going to continue to see a lot of what we're seeing now. It's going to be the complete decentralization of retail. These enclosed malls are going the way of the dinosaur. We are actually working with legislators right now to campaign for some federal funds to potentially redevelop these enclosed malls, because really, they're always mostly really well located real estate. But what do you do? What do you do with a 300,000 square foot mall that's basically empty, and everybody's like, well, just turn it into a distribution center. Well, a distribution center needs, those 30 to 40 foot spans. And if you have a mall that has columns every 20 feet, you're not going to use that for distribution purposes. So, 20 years from now, that, it's going to be and we're rapidly approaching this. No longer are we going to have, 100%, tenanted retail centers. It's going to be a mix of medical. Medical is going to be a keystone of development going forward. So you're going to see medical, you're going to see service use. I think we're going to continue to see, residential being incorporated in a lot of development when it makes sense. So I think the big buzz is going to be smaller square footages, because we're over retail in the United States. I think we're built out 23 square feet per person. The next closest country is built out 10 feet per person, 10 square feet per person. So we're over retail double to the next country. So we're, it was an arms race in the 60s and the 70s and 80s to really build real estate. And now we're having to come up with ways and solutions and operators to fill these vacancies. And really, honestly, the best case in most cases is just to tear it down and start over. So, convenience based is absolutely going to be crucial. I assume in 20 years from now, because, we're going to have self-driving cars in the next 2 to 3 years. I assume in 20 years, you don't have to leave your couch to shop, because you're going to hit a button on your app, or, what probably won't even be a button. You just think about it, and that self-driving car is going to shop for you and it's going to bring it to your house. So, brick and mortar retail is not going away, but it's going to look a lot different in 20 years for sure.
Absolutely, it will. And you're talking about the indoor malls and what we do with them, what happens with them here in Jonesboro. Sadly, we had a tornado help us take down our indoor mall.
Wow.
But that with all the hurricanes and everything going on, that's a way
Yeah.
to help with the take down indoor malls.
Yeah. That's an unfortunate, but that's one way to do it.
Okay, we do have another question in the chat. Home Goods pivoted during COVID to create an online presence after years of not having one due to how their stores were structured.
Yes.
How do you weigh the pros and cons of staying offline compared to online when your business has existed for so long without one?
Yes. And that was TJX Brands owns Marshalls, TJ Maxx, and Home Goods, and that was a big deal when Home Goods pivoted to have an online presence. I don't know if that online presence specifically for Home Goods will stay. The beauty about Home Goods and TJ Maxx and Ross and these discount retailers is, they offer low price goods, but also they offer that treasure hunt experience. And really, that's one of the main things about brick and mortar, why I'm very convinced that it's not going away, because it is about that experience. So those retailers offer that experience that can't be replicated through e-commerce. If they have an online SKU or online POS that has all their items listed, what fun is it to do that when you can go into the store? And because the beautiful thing about going to TJ Maxx is you never know what you're going to see when you get in there. So but yeah, the pivot, if you've been in business for 20 years, I would say, keep doing what you're doing, but keep a close look in the rearview mirror, because let's take Radio Shack for instance. They were like, you know what, we're only going to sell these electronics and hardware items that people can buy. We're not going to invest money in our employees. We're not going to train them. Whereas Best Buy was on the same path. They almost went bankrupt 5 years ago, but they made a pivot to say, hey, we're going to focus. We're going to sell the same goods as Radio Shack. We're in a much larger square footage, but we're really going to double down on merchandising, and we're going to double down on training our staff, because they know that electronics change so quickly, that if you don't have a staff that can adequately explain the goods and services they're selling within the store, what value are you going to provide? So identify your special niche. If that is something that cannot be disrupted through e-commerce, you're good as gold. But if you have a concept that can be heavily disrupted by e-commerce and you don't embrace that, you could get left behind.
All right, very good. Frankie, you can unmute yourself if you wanted to follow up on your question. If she can hear me. There she is.
Yes, Clay, I'm the person that asked about taking that holistic approach to retail recruitment.
Yes.
Now, in Arkansas and really across the country, we are a nation of smaller towns.
Mm-hmm.
At 25,000 to maybe 40,000 category, that could be within close proximity of that major commercial center.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a lot of towns that are not. They're more isolated. What we have found over the years is that leadership, in some of these towns will look at data and they see that they are losing, sales in a particular area, and they are determined to get, a Cracker Barrel into their town, even one hour down the road. So that was the question I had, basically, was small town. And if you have an economic developer that's working in the area, that's all the difference. But so many do not.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll say, most traditional economic development does not focus on retail. I'm starting to see that kind of change a little bit, and then more emphasis put on retail. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, small town USA is kind of our bread and butter. Most of our clients are in that 10,000 to 50,000 population. They're not the major metros. They don't need help with the retail. When I'm working with a city, it's because they typically have a deficit in retail, or they have a specific area within the market that is either a food desert or just needs some additional retail, and we can get brought in to help circumvent that process a little bit. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, the data does not tell the whole story. Leakage does not tell the whole story. Psychographics plays such a large role in retail now. Retailers are really, really harnessing that, because psychographics is going to tell beyond a lot of other things. Retailers know exactly, if I'm Hibbett Sports, I know exactly who my consumer is. I know what they like to do in their free time. I know their favorite, thing to eat. I know their favorite thing to drink. And psychographics kind of paint that picture. Now, understanding what your psychographics are and understanding how to target specific retailers that fit those psychographics is a tougher task. But it's certainly if you're looking at psychographics of a market and you pick up a trend that you have, let's just say that you have a population that prefers discount grocers, and you don't have a discount grocer in your market, that can be an indicator. So all that's to say is you got to take all the information and put it together. Don't rely on just that one one data set. You know, the data might say that you have no leakage in restaurants, but you're looking at your market and you've got no casual dining, you've got no fast casual, which is that kind of in between quick service and casual, and you know good and well your community would support it. Don't let that be a hurdle. Don't put that hurdle in front of yourself to not reach out to those concepts just because the data says that the market can't support it. You know, gaps, demand leakage, surplus is all great. But if you understand how those numbers are derived, you'll become disenchanted with them a little bit. They do paint a nice picture, but it is not the end all be all.
Yes, we have had that conversation here in the office about the methodology behind some of the data that
Yep,
you can access.
sure. It's a little hocus pocus.
Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for the question.
All right, I am not seeing any other questions. Clay, is there anything else that you wanted to add? I think hopefully we'll be seeing you more here in Arkansas in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm in Arkansas all the time, so I'd love to. If anybody would want to meet face to face, I'd love to do it. But I just want to thank everyone for the opportunity. It's great to talk to you all. And if you have any questions or any feedback, I'm always available. I think you can get my contact information pretty easily. But yeah, would love to chat anytime. And thank you for the time.
All right, thank you. And so everyone, that's going to wrap us up for today's workshop. I appreciate everyone taking the time to join us and learn information and strategies to benefit all of your communities. We do hope to see you again on September 28th for navigating federal and state recovery and resiliency resources. And of course, don't forget to get registered on our website. So thanks everyone. We will see you soon.
Thank you.